Millionaire CEO accidentally bumps into a girl at a luxury event and discovers true love. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A summer moon glimmered high above the ornate mansion where the annual Luxuria Gala was in full swing. It was the kind of event that drew the most influential magnates, celebrities, and dignitaries under the same chandeliers, all vying for a moment in the spotlight. Outside, luxury cars lined up like gleaming jewels, delivering men and women in tailored suits and designer gowns onto a plush crimson carpet. Paparazzi and camera flashes wove a tapestry of light along the entrance, capturing each attendee's carefully curated image. Inside the grand foyer, a live orchestra played a soft waltz. The decor was flawless, towering floral arrangements, golden drapes cascading down marble walls, and waiters weaving through the crowd offering delicate canapés on silver trays. In the center of the ballroom, a massive crystal chandelier sparkled like a cluster of frozen stars. Beyond the gilded arches, guests drifted into smaller parlors, each decorated with a specific theme, an opulent labyrinth designed to impress even the most jaded elite. Among these lavishly dressed figures stood Alexander Castell, a man known simply as Mr. Castell in business circles. He was at least a head taller than most, with dark, perfectly styled hair and shoulders that bore the posture of success. At just 34 years old, Alexander was rumored to be the youngest self-made billionaire in the city's history. Everything about him, from his immaculate tuxedo to his measured smile, radiated control. According to tabloids, he was unstoppable, a visionary CEO with a relentless work ethic and an empire built on innovative tech solutions. But if the evening's press had looked deeper, they might have noticed an invisible weight on Alexander's shoulders. Even as he nodded politely at compliments, his eyes flickered with a restlessness he couldn't quite hide. For all the acclaim and Forbes covers, Alexander stood in a silent tension with himself, because while his name was associated with success, it was also burdened by lonely nights in boardrooms, calls that ended with the dreaded beep of an empty line, and half-eaten dinners in penthouses that felt more like museums than homes. To the outside world, he was a paragon of ambition, yet something essential, something heartbreakingly human, was missing. Friends? He'd drifted from them in the chase for deals and expansions. Family? A long, complicated story that no headline fully captured. Love? A concept he dismissed as a distraction, nurtured by illusions of fairy tales and naive hearts. At 34, Alexander Castell was convinced that the only relationships he needed were with stock indices and corporate acquisitions. At that very moment, across the ballroom, a young woman named Helena Wright stepped in timidly through the side doors. Helena wasn't on the official guest list. She was a junior event organizer's assistant, tasked with last-minute errands for her demanding boss. She smoothed out her simple black dress, which was neither expensive nor brand new, and tried to blend into the background. Her long day of frantic calls and chaotic deliveries showed in her eyes, yet there was a certain warmth in her smile that refused to dim, even after hours of dashing around the mansion. Helena had grown up in a modest home, worlds away from the glittering circles swirling around her now. While her friends dreamt of making it big, Helena found contentment in helping others, managing small events for local charities, volunteering at the library, or offering to babysit for free so struggling families could enjoy a rare evening out. She never asked for recognition. A humble sense of purpose guided her every action. That sense of purpose led her here to the Luxuria Gala, where she'd spent the past 2 days ensuring everything was perfect. The decor, the seating arrangement, the lights, the sound checks. She wasn't expecting to mingle with the world's wealthiest. She simply wanted the gala to run smoothly, especially since it benefited a variety of philanthropic projects dear to her heart. Part of her role for the night was to make sure the spotlight shone on all the philanthropic achievements being celebrated, However, Helena hadn't anticipated that her path would cross with Alexander Castell's in the most unlikely, clumsy way. As the orchestrated waltz gave way to an upbeat tune, she tried to rush around a corner, arms loaded with a small box of leftover programs. She was so focused on navigating around a towering sculpture that she nearly collided with a waiter balancing a tray of champagne flutes. Dodging at the last moment, Helena spun and straight into a solid figure that felt like a wall. She gasped. The programs scattered across the polished floor, and in that instant of panic she latched onto the stranger's lapel to keep herself from tumbling. It was Alexander Castell. He staggered half a step, arms instinctively going around her to brace her fall. The moment froze. Golden lamplight haloed them both, and the hush of onlookers who saw the nearly comedic mishap turned into a stunned hush. The woman in his arms stared up, wide-eyed, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Alexander blinked, barely comprehending the unexpected warmth pressed against him. He saw Helena's face, so earnest and apologetic, framed by a few loose strands of her gently curled hair. No one had grabbed him like this, so personally, since he couldn't remember. For an instant, time seemed to contract into this fleeting embrace. The hum of conversation around them vanished, replaced by the rapid echo of his own heartbeat. He caught a faint whiff of her mild perfume, something floral and comforting. "Sorry," she whispered, pulling away in a rush and nearly knocking over a small pedestal with an ice sculpture. Flustered, Helena crouched to collect the scattered programs, her mind a whirlwind of panic. "My boss will kill me, the guests are staring. I nearly destroyed the entire event." "I'm so sorry," she repeated breathlessly, not even daring to look him in the eyes. Alexander, usually razor-sharp in every situation, found himself momentarily adrift. His carefully practiced social mask cracked, replaced by genuine surprise. "No harm done," he finally managed, bending down to help her pick up the scattered pages. As their hands touched the same piece of paper, a current of something unexplainable coursed through him. There was no sense of awkwardness on her part, only sincerity. For a second time that evening, he felt a pull of warmth that overshadowed the typical distance he held between himself and everyone else. Onlookers were quick to mask their curiosity, returning to champagne and chatter as the incident passed. A few even joked quietly about the CEO's dramatic rescue, but Alexander tuned them out. He was focused on Helena, whose eyes flickered with worry and embarrassment. He offered a reassuring half-smile, something rare enough from him that it took Helena by surprise. "I hope I didn't—" She stood up, clutching the box of programs so tightly her knuckles turned white. She finally noticed that the corner of his tailored jacket was wrinkled from her grip. "Let me fix your jacket. It's all my fault." She tried to smooth the fabric with trembling fingers. "No, really," Alexander said, his voice softening in a way even he didn't expect. "It's fine. I'm fine. Are you hurt?" She blinked, momentarily forgetting the sting of her knees from when she almost fell. I think I'm all right. Just mortified." Her cheeks were still warm, and she realized in that moment who exactly she had bumped into. Alexander Castell, one of the main guests of honor. One of the wealthiest men in attendance. A swirl of new panic flitted through her chest. "Don't be," Alexander replied. He paused, not sure why he was lingering in front of a stranger. "I'm Alexander. I take it you're part of the organizing team?" Helena nodded, too tongue-tied to properly respond. She wondered whether to address him as Mr. Castell, to apologize again, or to simply flee. Before she could decide, Alexander gently pointed to the fallen program or two she'd missed. She stooped to pick them up, whispering a final apology that was lost to the murmuring crowd. For reasons unknown to him, Alexander felt a twinge of regret as she turned to go. There was something unguarded in her posture that so starkly contrasted the posed figures swirling throughout the gala. He coughed, stepping back into the role of the polished magnate, reminding himself that he needed to greet potential investors. A fleeting hug, an accidental collision. Such things had no place in his meticulously structured world. And yet, for one brief moment, it had made him feel truly alive. He watched Helena retreat into a side corridor, arms once more clutching that box of programs. His chest tightened with a feeling he couldn't name. Across the hall, a sponsor called out his name, beckoning him to meet new associates. With a final glance in her direction, he composed himself. Business first, as always. But something deep down whispered that this was just the beginning of a story far greater than any corporate venture. Cascading notes from the orchestra drifted across the gilded ballroom, mingling with the lively conversation of the Luxuria Gala's affluent guests. Helena had successfully slipped away from the immediate glare of the curious crowd after her collision with Alexander Castell. She found refuge near a corridor leading to the event's backstage area where table linens and extra decor were stored. With one hand pressed to her chest in an attempt to steady her racing heart, she took a moment to breathe. She hadn't meant to run off quite so abruptly. But the embarrassment of nearly toppling one of the night's most important attendees, and a billionaire CEO at that, was overwhelming. Her nerves, already stretched thin from prepping last-minute details for the event, felt as fragile as spun glass. Each time she closed her eyes, she could still sense the warmth of Alexander's arms, that fleeting intimacy in the middle of a swirling crowd. Helena forced the memory aside and busied herself checking items off the clipboard in her hands. The biggest checkmark, she noticed, was for the final philanthropic announcement scheduled at the end of the gala, a segment celebrating how the night's donations would fund hospitals, scholarships, and elderly care programs. That cause was why she believed in this extravagant evening despite her own humble circumstances. The people who would benefit from tonight's generosity had faces and stories she cared about deeply. Focus, she whispered to herself, just get through the tasks. But no matter how many lines of her to-do list she scanned, her mind kept flitting back to Alexander. He had looked surprisingly human, not just the polished veneer of a high-powered exec or the cutthroat captain of industry. In that brief moment when she clung to his jacket, she'd glimpsed something unguarded in his dark eyes, almost a flicker of surprise, or perhaps curiosity. She shook her head, as if to free her thoughts. A pair of volunteers hurried by, carrying centerpieces that needed repositioning. Helena swiftly resumed her role, leading the volunteers toward the correct table placements. Yet even with the flurry of instructions and the hum of logistical chatter, a persistent question tugged at the back of her mind. Who was Alexander Castell when the cameras were off, when the world's demands quieted? Meanwhile, Alexander had been whisked into a whirlwind of polite introductions and clinking champagne glasses. The event's sponsors were eager to secure a word with him, and he found himself in a constant cycle of nodding, shaking hands, and offering measured pleasantries. Yet his attention drifted. He caught himself scanning the periphery of the room for Helena's silhouette more times than he could count. It was irrational, he told himself. He'd known her for all of 20 seconds. The typical interactions he valued were ones that promised returns, business partnerships, investments, beneficial alliances. He didn't pursue random collisions, yet something about her earnest face lingered in his mind. "Alex, you with us?" The voice came from his friend and occasional advisor, Trenton Moore, a seasoned investor with silver hair and a penchant for raising half an eyebrow whenever he suspected Alexander's attention was faltering. Alexander snapped back. Trenton and a small group of potential investors stood in a semicircle around him, all wearing the polite smiles of men who spent their lives in high-profile negotiations. "Apologies," Alexander replied, regaining his composure. "My mind wandered for a moment. Let's pick up where we left off." "I was asking about your expansions in Europe," one of the investors prompted, adjusting his cufflinks. "Word is you're acquiring smaller tech startups in rapid succession. Is that the new Castell method? Absorb potential competition before they can challenge you?" Alexander cleared his throat, launching into a succinct explanation about international markets and synergy. The men listened, impressed by his strategic depth. Still, even in the midst of his corporate monologue, a small part of Alexander's mind remained attuned to the possibility of spotting Helena among the caterers or staff. When he finally finished, a round of appreciative nods sealed the mini-meeting. The group parted with the usual promises of scheduling more detailed discussions soon. Trenton lingered by Alexander's side. "You're off your game tonight," Trenton observed quietly, arms folded. "How do you figure?" A subtle grin touched Trenton's lips. "Don't fool yourself. I've known you for years, Alexander. This is the first time I've seen you lose focus in the middle of serious talk. Care to enlighten me?" Alexander hesitated, searching for a plausible dismissal. But for once, he didn't feel like feigning cynicism. "It's nothing, just someone I bumped into, literally." Trenton arched that trademark eyebrow. A collision that's got the unstoppable Alexander Castell momentarily distracted? Must be something. Before Alexander could offer a retort, a pair of philanthropic committee members approached, requesting a quick word. With a wry shake of his head, Trenton turned away, letting the matter rest for now. Alexander mentally noted that he owed Trenton a further explanation, though he himself wasn't sure what that explanation would be. Helena's next assignment took her through a labyrinth of corridors toward the backstage dais. She double-checked that the microphones were tested, the stage lighting was properly set, and the name cards for the final philanthropic panel were perfectly aligned. This closing segment was the highlight of the night, awarding grants and donations to several charities, scholarships for underprivileged youth, and medical research. As she tidied the podium, Helena felt a spark of pride. She was just an assistant, yes, but she'd poured her heart into these charitable endeavors. The children who'd receive better schooling, the seniors who'd get improved facilities, the patients in rural clinics who'd finally have access to specialists, those were her motivations. The swirl of expensive gowns and diamonds might be extraneous noise, but the underlying cause was real. "Helena!" Her boss's voice, sharp and impatient, cut through her thoughts. Meredith was a middle-aged woman with impeccable taste in power suits and a perpetual scowl etched into her features whenever she was stressed. Right now, she sounded stressed. "We have a crisis. The main speaker for the philanthropic close can't make it. Emergency flight delays. We need a new speaker to present the final donation announcements. Hurry, find a stand-in." Helena's eyes darted to the intricately printed program. It was tradition that a recognized figure gave this speech, someone whose name carried enough star power to keep donors engaged and hopeful. She scanned the guest list. I can try one of the other patrons." Meredith massaged her temples as though this fiasco had personally cost her a year of her life. "Yes, but it needs to be someone with credibility. People will tune out if it's a random staffer. No offense, but we need star wattage, or at least well-known philanthropic involvement." A few potential names flitted through Helena's mind. Then she paused. Her gaze shifted to the pages in her hands, scanning mention after mention of the event's biggest sponsor. The Castell Foundation was a major benefactor for the night's charitable drive, something overshadowed by its founder's formidable business persona. She'd read about it in the earlier briefing. Alexander Castell privately funded numerous education and health initiatives, though rarely publicized them. She took a breath. "What if we ask Alexander Castell?" Meredith's reaction was immediate. "That would be ideal, but do you think he'll agree at such short notice?" "He's already a top sponsor," Helena reasoned, recalling the articles about his quiet, philanthropic side. "If I explain the situation, maybe he'll do it as a favor to the cause." Meredith's expression flitted between desperation and relief. "Then go, speak with him. We have less than an hour before the final segment. Hurry." Helena nodded, quickly left the stage area, and wove her way back through the crowd. Her heart pulsed with anxiety. Approaching Alexander once had been an accident, but now she would have to do it deliberately and ask him for a favor, no less. She still felt the sting of embarrassment from earlier, yet the philanthropic close was crucial. She pushed aside her nerves, ignoring the swirl of elegantly dressed guests. Finally, she spotted Alexander near one of the grand hall's arched doorways, conversing with a different set of influential donors. She paused at a distance, summoning her courage, and took a hesitant step forward. Then another. One of the donors concluded a conversation and drifted away, leaving Alexander momentarily unoccupied. Helena seized that chance. She threaded through the space, almost losing her nerve as she approached. But then Alexander lifted his gaze, and their eyes locked. A flicker of recognition, followed by a faint smile, crossed his face. For a moment, the rest of the bustling gala seemed to fade around them. "Helena, right?" he said quietly, stepping slightly away from the passing crowd to offer her a semblance of privacy. She exhaled in relief that he remembered her name. "Yes, Mr. Castell, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just, there's a situation." She clutched her clipboard tighter. "Our main speaker for the philanthropic close is absent. We need someone with presence, someone who actually believes in these charities, someone the audience will pay attention to." He arched a brow, waiting. "Would you consider stepping in?" Helena asked, her voice barely steady. "It's short notice, I know, but you already sponsor so many of these programs, and it would mean so much." Alexander didn't speak immediately, and Helena's pulse hammered in the silence. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "I'll do it." The relief was so intense it almost made her dizzy. She offered a grateful smile that lit her face in a way that stirred something in Alexander. Before she could say more, Meredith's strident call echoed from across the hall, reminding Helena that time was short. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping back. "We're starting soon. I'll let the stage crew know." As she turned to leave, she felt his hand lightly touch her elbow, stopping her. "Helena," he said, his voice gentle, "I'm glad you came to me, and about before, I didn't catch you properly. Next time I promise I won't let you fall." Her cheeks warmed. She nodded wordlessly, then vanished into the crowd, leaving Alexander with a subtle sense of wonder. In less than an hour, he'd stand before the biggest names in society to deliver a speech he hadn't prepared. Strangely, he didn't feel apprehensive, because in Helena's request he sensed something genuine, a cause worth speaking for, even if he hadn't planned it. He checked his watch, inhaled, and told himself that for once he wouldn't worry about calculating the bottom line. This was about giving a voice to something that truly mattered, and as the gala's music swelled, he realized with a start that it might also be about meeting someone who reminded him of the humanity he thought he'd lost. Quiet anticipation wafted through the grand ballroom as the hour drew near for the philanthropic close. Tables draped in gold and silver linen formed concentric circles around a small stage, where the podium waited under a soft spotlight. Guests finished their last flutes of champagne or politely set down half-eaten desserts, turning their attention to the upcoming ceremony. This was the moment the Luxuria Gala had been building toward all evening, where astronomical donations, public gratitude, and heartfelt stories would converge. Backstage, Helena stood beside a tall curtain, her fingers tightening on the edge of her clipboard. Beyond the thick swath of velvet, she could see the silhouettes of the audience, the bright glow of chandeliers, and the flicker of cameras adjusting their focus. More than anything, she felt the weight of responsibility. If Alexander's speech went well, the gala's philanthropic mission would gain even more momentum. If it stumbled, if the guests felt unmoved or uninterested, well, it might remain just another lavish party. Her boss, Meredith, paced nearby, eyes skimming the silent phone in her hand, in case of any last-second catastrophes. "We'll cue you from here," Meredith whispered tersely to Alexander, who had joined them a moment ago. He looked calm, far calmer than Helena felt. In one hand, he held a folded sheet of notes. Alexander met Helena's gaze briefly and offered a reassuring nod. She tried to return it, but caught herself mentally rehearsing all the directions she'd given the stage crew. Lights dim at the introduction, one short musical cue, then Alexander would step forward. The philanthropic organization's representatives would join him on stage at the conclusion. Simple, but every detail mattered to Helena. Soft classical music eased through the speakers as the MC, impeccably dressed, approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice mellow and rich, "it has been our great pleasure tonight to celebrate generosity and community on such a grand scale. Now, to highlight the extraordinary impact of your contributions, we invite to the stage one of our most dedicated benefactors, Mr. Alexander Castell." A round of appreciative applause rose from the crowd. From behind the curtain, Helena's heartbeat thumped in time with the clapping. Alexander offered a subtle smile, then walked onto the stage with a natural confidence. Even though he wore a classic tuxedo like many others in the crowd, there was an understated elegance in the way he carried himself. No flashy gestures, just a quiet authority that drew eyes to him. Helena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The hush in the ballroom deepened as Alexander placed his notes on the podium. His gaze swept across the sea of expectant faces. Her vantage from backstage allowed her to see the slight tension in his jaw, the small movement of his shoulders as he steadied himself. "Good evening," he began, his tone as measured as one might expect from a polished CEO. "When I first considered speaking tonight, I thought about facts and figures, line items that show exactly where donations will go, the number of scholarships funded, or the new hospital wings built. That's how I usually communicate, with data, progress charts, returns on investment." A faint ripple of good-natured laughter emerged, and Alexander allowed a wry smile. "But I realized that philanthropic work isn't about spreadsheets," he continued, letting his voice grow warmer. "It's about people, real people in real communities who need assistance, hope, and opportunities. It's about changing someone's life course by offering them resources they never thought they'd have." Helena found herself transfixed. The crowd seemed just as engaged, leaning forward as though Alexander was speaking personally to each of them. She noticed how his expression softened on certain words, like hope and change. This was no corporate pitch. Something more genuine radiated in his voice. He glanced momentarily at his notes, then set them aside, barely referencing them again. "When I was younger," Alexander said, "my family wasn't wealthy, not by a long shot. My father was a teacher, my mother ran a tiny neighborhood bookstore. Our house was modest, and we lived well outside the city's shiny downtown. But I never felt poor. My parents were generous, with their time, their energy, their faith in people. If a kid in my class had trouble affording textbooks, my mother let them borrow from her store for free. If a neighbor lost a job, my father spent evenings helping them build a resume or teaching them a new skill. I saw firsthand how small acts of help can grow into bigger transformations. Sometimes all someone needs is a hand extended, like a stepping stone that leads to another path in life." A murmur of agreement spread through the audience. Helena, backstage, swallowed a lump in her throat. She too had grown up in a world where small generosities meant the difference between hope and despair. Hearing Alexander's personal account made her feel an unexpected kinship with him. "Tonight," he went on, "we're raising funds for healthcare access, educational grants, and community support programs. Some of you have given enormous sums, truly generous amounts that will shape countless futures. Others perhaps have given smaller donations but with equal heart, and that's the real power behind philanthropy, the simple act of caring. We might come from different backgrounds, incomes, or positions of influence, but every person in this room has the capacity to make a difference for someone else." He paused, letting the moment breathe. A few people dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. In the front row, Helena could see one of the charity representatives. An older woman with tears glistening, her life's work finally acknowledged before an audience that could change it forever. "This evening is a testament to that belief," Alexander concluded, voice steady but emotional undertones clear. "May we all remember that charity is not about who has the most wealth, but about who is willing to share what they have to create better possibilities for others. Thank you for your generosity, for your trust, and for continuing to make the world a place where hope thrives." A moment of profound silence enveloped the hall. Then a wave of applause surged forward, sincere, thunderous, laced with admiration that transcended mere politeness. From her hidden vantage, Helena pressed a hand to her mouth, feeling an almost overwhelming mix of relief, pride, and something else. Some new warmth for the man who had just bared part of his soul under the stage lights. As the applause continued, representatives of the charities stepped up beside Alexander. The older woman who had been moved to tears offered heartfelt thanks. They handed him a symbolic check to sign, a ceremonial gesture representing the pooled donations. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for press releases and philanthropic journals. Alexander offered a mild, humble smile, letting the charitable organizations take center stage as they thanked the donors. Finally, the stage lights dimmed again, and the MC returned to close out the segment. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's have one more round of applause for Mr. Castell and for everyone who has contributed to these outstanding causes tonight." The applause was deafening. Slowly, the overhead lights returned to their gala brightness, and the audience began transitioning into casual conversation again, the official program now complete. Helena scurried back into the corridor, eager to congratulate Alexander, or at least thank him for salvaging the evening's keynote address. But she was forced to pause. Other attendees swarmed him the moment he stepped off stage. Everyone wanted a moment of his attention, a chance to praise his speech or to angle for a conversation about possible collaboration. But eventually, after maybe 5 or 6 handshakes and polite nods, Alexander's gaze broke free from the throng, and it landed right on Helena. A brief flicker of relief passed through him. He excused himself gently and crossed to meet her, away from the thrumming crowd. "That was incredible," she said, trying not to sound breathless. "Thank you for stepping in. The entire segment was perfect, better than I ever hoped." A faint color touched his cheeks as though he wasn't accustomed to such direct gratitude. "I'm glad it helped. You look more relieved than I've felt in a while." Helena smiled, her eyes shining. "Your speech. It wasn't just facts or generic sentiments, it felt real." "I think that meant a lot to the guests." Alexander exhaled quietly. "I meant what I said. My foundation, these initiatives, they're not just for show." He paused, weighing his words. "And I'm grateful you gave me the chance to remind myself why I do it." They stood there, momentarily isolated from the clamor. In the hush of that corner, Helena felt a sense of closeness to him she couldn't quite explain, a bond forged through crisis management and a shared belief in helping others. She cleared her throat softly. "I know you probably get 1 million requests a day from charities. That must be overwhelming." His lips curved into a thoughtful half-smile. "Yes, it can be. But I'd rather have too many requests than none. It's a privilege to be in a position to help. I never want to lose sight of that." Helena nodded. She understood the sentiment deeply, though she was on the other side of the economic spectrum. "If you ever want to see some of the people these programs help, there's a neighborhood not far from here, my neighborhood, where the local youth center recently got new supplies thanks to funds from your foundation. The kids there are, well, it's changing their lives." Alexander's eyes lit with genuine interest. "I'd like that. Maybe you can show me around sometime?" The invitation in his tone was unmistakable. Helena's cheeks warmed again, but she mustered a steady nod. "I'd be happy to." A gentle lull in the music signaled the shift into the gala's final dance segment. Attendees drifted onto the ballroom floor in pairs, some swaying elegantly, others simply enjoying the ambiance. The lights had softened, turning the space into a realm of shimmering pastel. Alexander glanced at Helena, noticing her gaze flick toward the dance floor. The corners of his mouth lifted in a mixture of hesitation and invitation. "It might be a bit forward of me, but would you like to dance?" Caught off guard, Helena's breath nearly caught in her throat. She glanced down at her simple black dress, feeling acutely aware she wasn't as glamorous as the socialites swirling around in designer couture. Yet the warmth in his question, the quiet sincerity, it made her want to say yes. I would. But there are still things I need to check. The event?" He raised a hand gently as if to forestall her protest. "I understand work obligations all too well, but perhaps just one dance? A short one?" She felt torn for the briefest moment, then realized the staff was mostly wrapping up their tasks. The culminating donation ceremony had been the night's apex. Even Meredith, perpetually frazzled, was smiling at the success of the event. For once, Helena could give herself permission to enjoy a moment, to savor the success she helped orchestrate. "All right," she murmured, her heart fluttering. "Just one." Alexander offered his arm, and together they stepped onto the edge of the dance floor. Soft violins guided them into a gentle waltz. Helena's nerves threatened to spike again. She had rarely danced at formal events, especially not with someone so prominent. Yet Alexander guided her with a surprising ease that put her at ease. She let the calm, rhythmic sway of the music carry her. Their movements were tentative at first, like two people unaccustomed to stepping into each other's personal space. But as the notes laced around them, they found an effortless coordination. Helena realized that in his arms, she felt none of the frantic tension she had braced for. Instead, there was a certain peacefulness, a sense that for these few minutes, everything else was hushed. The other dancers faded into a soft swirl of colors and lights. Helena's gaze flicked up to Alexander's face. He looked content, different from the polished mask she had glimpsed earlier, more open, more approachable. She felt the slightest pressure of his hand at her waist guiding her turn, and she followed the step, discovering something akin to trust in a man she barely knew but who, in the span of one evening, had shown her kindness, sincerity, and even a hint of vulnerability. When the waltz drew to a close, they stood in the final note's hush. Around them, applause broke out for the orchestra's lovely set. Helena and Alexander separated, hands slipping away almost reluctantly. In the hush that followed, they exchanged a glance that brimmed with unspoken possibilities. Behind them, Meredith gave Helena a surreptitious thumbs up from a distance, then promptly turned to direct staff members about post-event cleanup. Alexander, too, noticed the subtle, comedic relief of watchers discreetly observing from the sidelines. He cleared his throat and stepped back, offering Helena a slight bow as was customary on the dance floor. "That was nice," Helena managed, swallowing against the sudden dryness in her throat. Alexander nodded, a quiet chuckle escaping. "It was. Thank you." The final song began, but they both moved aside, making space for other couples who joined in. Helena felt a rush of realization that she had just stepped outside her comfort zone. Something deeper had happened on that dance floor, more than an impulsive swirl to classical music. And as she looked at Alexander, she sensed he felt it too. He offered a soft smile and rested a hand lightly on her elbow, guiding her a step away from the crowded floor. "When the event ends, I'd like to talk more. About the youth center. About everything." Her heart gave a little leap. "I'll be here, helping close down. I'm not leaving anytime soon," she replied, somewhat shyly. Alexander nodded. "Good," was all he said. Then, pressing his lips together as if holding back more words, He let his hand slide away. They both heard new voices calling his name, other sponsors, officials wanting to speak, and Helena's walkie-talkie crackled faintly with staff updates. Duty summoned them both. With one last shared look, they parted. Helena turned and busied herself with event protocols, her mind already swirling with emotions she couldn't neatly categorize. Alexander cast a final glance in her direction before he blended back into the flow of suits and gowns that moved through the gala. Neither could fully comprehend how a single night and one accidental hug might have set them on an unforeseen path, but as the final dances carried on and the chandelier lights glimmered above a tapestry of donors and dreamers, they both sensed that something remarkable had taken root, a fragile beginning, where love's gentle seedling might just flourish in the unlikeliest of soils. The echoes of music dwindled in the grand ballroom, replaced by the muted clatter of plates and cutlery being cleared away. A handful of guests still lingered over half-finished drinks, small clusters of acquaintances exchanging last-minute business cards or polite goodbyes. In corners, staff efficiently folded table linens and began dismantling decor under the watchful eye of Meredith, who directed them with brisk authority. Helena found herself standing at the periphery of the main dance floor, clipboard still in hand. The hush after the gala's climax left her both relieved and oddly wistful. There was always a deflation when an event ended, the final exhale after countless hours of effort. But there was something else inside her, a warmth she couldn't quite name. Every time she recalled that dance with Alexander, a little surge of adrenaline fluttered through her. 2 volunteers approached her, balancing trays stacked with leftover programs and brochures. "Where do you want these?" one asked, voice hushed in deference to the calm that had overtaken the once lively hall. "Lobby tables?" Helena replied, conscious to keep her tone gentle even though her mind was elsewhere. "We can offer them to any remaining guests or staff who might want more info about the charities." The volunteers nodded and departed. Helena took a moment to survey the room. The towering floral centerpieces had begun to droop slightly, the chandeliers were dimmed, and the gleaming marble floors bore scuffs from hundreds of shoes. Yet it all looked unexpectedly beautiful in the gentle afterglow, a testament to the night's success. She couldn't help feeling proud of the part she'd played in orchestrating it. As her gaze wandered, it landed on Alexander across the room. He was in earnest conversation with 2 older benefactors, men in well-tailored suits who gestured animatedly as they spoke. Even from a distance, she could see the polite half-smile on Alexander's face, the same expression he wore when fielding business talk. Her heart twinged with curiosity. Would he still want to talk once he was done? Or had the moment they'd shared already dissolved in the endless press of responsibilities? A hand touched her shoulder lightly. She started, turning to see Meredith, who wore a rare smile. "Good job tonight, Helena," her boss said, voice hushed. "I might bark orders, but you really came through with that speech arrangement. It was a success." Helena breathed a soft laugh. "We got lucky," Alexander agreed. "But yes, it went well. Everyone seemed moved." Meredith's eyes flicked to him for an instant. He's a catch, that one. Never realized how charismatic he could be until tonight. Anyway, she pointed to Helena's clipboard. "I assume you'll finish the post-event checklists. Once you're done, you're free to go. You've more than earned your rest." "I'll stay as long as you need," Helena insisted out of habit, but Meredith waved her off. "There's not much left. Let the volunteers pack up the last things. I won't be a total tyrant." With that, she drifted away, her attention already drawn to the next cluster of staff needing direction. Helena looked down at her clipboard. She flipped through pages of notes and tasks, mentally ticking off items. Catering accounted for, band paid, leftover supplies scheduled for donation, final receipts tallied. Her pen hovered over the final line. "Confirm keynote speaker arrangement. Complete." She checked it with a flourish, then closed the clipboard, exhaling with a quiet sense of fulfillment. It was over. The night, long planned and relentlessly coordinated, had unfolded to its triumphant close, and she, the assistant from a modest background, had been at the center of it, in more ways than one. The sound of footsteps brought her back to the present. She turned and saw Alexander approaching, his expression less guarded than it had been earlier. Behind him, the two older benefactors departed through the main doors, apparently satisfied with their conversation. He came to a stop a few feet away, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Still on duty?" he asked gently. "Technically, yes, until everyone's gone," she answered, glancing around at the thinning crowd. "But things are mostly in order now." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "You're thorough. I can see why the event went smoothly." Helena felt a faint blush at the praise. "I'm just an organizer's assistant, really. There's a whole team." Alexander tilted his head. "Modesty aside, I noticed you were the one always directing them. Even your boss defers to you. You're clearly more than just an assistant." She hesitated, unsure how to respond, then offered a small smile of gratitude. "Thank you." A soft lull followed, their eyes meeting in a kind of comfortable hush. Gently, Alexander broke the silence. "Would you mind showing me around that neighborhood center you mentioned sometime? I'd like to see firsthand how they've used the funds." A surge of excitement kindled in Helena. She was about to say, "Yes, of course," when she spotted an almost timid note in his gaze, as though he worried she might decline. That vulnerability, barely perceptible but there, tightened something in her chest. "I'd love to," she answered, her voice more certain than she expected. "Tomorrow afternoon? The kids are usually there after school." He looked at his phone's calendar briefly, eyebrows rising. "I have a meeting at noon, but I could meet you by late afternoon, if that's not too late." "That should be fine," she assured him, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. A small smile turned her lips. "They'll be excited to meet the person behind the foundation's upgrades." Alexander let out a soft chuckle. "Or they might be disappointed if they expected someone more impressive." "Trust me, you'll impress them just by showing you care," Helena murmured. They shared a moment of quiet understanding. Then the overhead speakers clicked off, signaling the final closure of the ballroom's sound system. Staff near the doors began stacking chairs. The hush of wrapping up filled the air. Alexander glanced around the slowly emptying space. "Do you need help with anything?" Helena blinked, caught off guard. "You want to help clean up?" He shrugged lightly. "I don't mind. I'm used to stepping in where needed." There was something in his tone, an echo of his earlier speech about small kindnesses. She studied him for a heartbeat. "Well, you could help collect those centerpieces if you want. Most are being donated to a nearby hospice, but we're short-handed with volunteers at this hour." Alexander nodded without hesitation. Together they crossed the hall toward the nearest table. The centerpiece was a lavish arrangement of white roses and greenery, perched in a tall crystal vase. Carefully, they lifted it and set it on a rolling cart. Helena grabbed an empty box for smaller floral accents. "How do you want these?" Alexander asked, picking up loose blooms that had fallen. "Here," Helena said, holding out the box. "We'll keep them together so they can still arrange mini bouquets at the hospice." He placed them in gently, then moved on to the next table. They continued like that, side by side, quietly gathering leftover flowers. Occasionally, Helena pointed out which stems were too wilted to be used. At one table, Alexander accidentally knocked a glass over, prompting a startled laugh from Helena. "Looks like I'm the clumsy one now," he said, amusement dancing in his eyes. A staffer rushed over to wipe the spilled water, and Helena reassured them it was fine. She couldn't help but notice how quickly Alexander apologized to the staffer, how he insisted on helping dry the area. So many wealthy guests ignored the labor around them, but Alexander's concern seemed genuine. They finished collecting centerpieces in about 15 minutes, pushing the cart to a side corridor where volunteers would handle final transport. By then, only a handful of people remained in the hall, diligently folding tablecloths or wheeling out racks of dinnerware. Helena leaned against the cart, exhaling. "I guess that's it," she said softly, scanning the quiet room. Alexander nodded, brushing a petal off his lapel. "Feels strange to see it all dismantled, doesn't it?" She gave a wistful smile. "Always does. But the best part of events is the impact they leave behind. The night might be over, but the changes we started will continue." He contemplated her words. "Well put." Another lull passed, more comfortable than awkward. Despite the late hour and the near-empty space, it felt peaceful, like they stood in a small pocket of time carved out just for them. After a moment, Helena realized they were both a bit hesitant to part ways. She mustered a light-hearted tone. "So, see you tomorrow? At the youth center?" Alexander's lips curved into a warm grin. "Absolutely. Just text me the address. I'll come by after my meeting." She nodded, rummaging for her phone. They exchanged numbers quickly, Helena typing in his name, her heart beating faster than she liked to admit. Then a staffer approached, politely informing Helena that the catering manager had a question before leaving. "I should go answer that," she said, feeling a tug of regret. "Sure," Alexander replied, sliding his phone into his pocket. "I'll let you finish up. Good night, Helena." "Good night, Mr. Castell," she responded, then added with a slight playful tilt of her head, "Or, can I call you Alexander?" He chuckled quietly. "Please do." She smiled, turned, and walked across the nearly bare ballroom floor, her steps echoing in the new emptiness. Though her back was turned, she felt Alexander's gaze follow her for a moment before he, too, made his way to the exit. In the parking lot, the city night was still. A mild breeze ruffled Helena's hair as she stepped outside. A few staff vehicles and luxury cars lingered under overhead lamps, casting slender shadows on the asphalt. She checked her phone, noticing the newly saved contact, Alexander Castell. It felt surreal. She found her modest sedan, loaded her clipboard and bag in the front seat, and sank into the driver's seat with a long exhale. Tomorrow, she'd show him the youth center. Would it all run smoothly? Would the kids, some of them from tough backgrounds, warm up to him? Probably, she decided. Alexander had a disarming calmness that invited trust, even from a quick glimpse. Starting the engine, she pulled out of the lot, the gala venue receding in the rear-view mirror. Headlights lit her path through quiet streets lined with tall corporate buildings. In the hush, she allowed herself to replay the night's events, meeting Alexander, that accidental hug, the dance, his personal revelations during the speech. A swirl of new emotions glowed inside her, somewhere between hopeful curiosity and a gentle excitement that made her heart feel light. She tried to remind herself to be practical. After all, she lived on a budget, saving every penny for graduate courses and to support her aging aunt. He was a billionaire CEO with a schedule that included global expansions and philanthropic galas. Realistically, their worlds couldn't be more different. And yet, the sincerity in his eyes when he spoke of his modest upbringing suggested they might share more common ground than she'd assumed. "Just see where it goes," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel. Maybe it was nothing beyond a spark of friendship, but that spark alone felt precious, especially in a city known for transactional relationships. She decided not to overthink it. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing fresh possibilities. Far across town, Alexander sat in the back seat of his chauffeured car, gazing out the tinted window as city lights blurred past. Typically, he would be on his phone, reviewing emails or reading financial forecasts. Tonight, however, his mind dwelled in the softness of Helena's voice, the kindness of her gesture in collecting flowers for the hospice, and the subdued enthusiasm she carried for helping others. He realized, with some astonishment, that he was more excited about visiting a local youth center than any board meeting on his calendar. In a quiet corner of his mind, He wondered if this was how normal people felt about discovering a new connection. Hopeful, unsure, but drawn to see what might blossom. When his driver pulled up to the glistening high-rise he called home, Alexander stepped out. The building's doorman greeted him, but for once he barely offered his usual polite nod. Instead, he walked through the pristine lobby, pressed the elevator button, and ascended to his penthouse with a sense of gentle anticipation. Inside his apartment, vast windows, minimalist furniture, panoramic cityscape, Alexander loosened his tie and let his gaze drift over the skyline. Somewhere out there, Helena was driving home. And in a small set of neighborhoods he had never personally visited, children would soon see their benefactor in the flesh. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. Would they like him? Would they be comfortable asking him questions? He set his tie on a chair and let out a low, contented sigh. "Tomorrow?" he said aloud, as if the walls could affirm it. For the first time in years, he felt a subtle flicker of excitement, not tethered to business. A reason to look forward to something besides quarterly results. He poured a glass of water and gazed at the bright tapestry of lights outside. The day had been long and exhausting, but it had birthed a small hope, a whisper of possibility he was eager to explore. When he closed his eyes to sleep that night, he found his last waking image was of Helena smiling under the gala's soft glow, eyes shining with quiet conviction. He drifted into slumber, uncharacteristically at peace, ready for tomorrow's unwritten story, whatever it might bring. Morning sunlight crept through the narrow blinds of Helena's small bedroom, warming her pillow and prying her from sleep earlier than usual. She rolled over, blinking in the softness of dawn, and gradually recalled what day it was. The day she would show Alexander Castell around the neighborhood youth center. A tiny jolt of anticipation coursed through her. Her apartment, modest but cozy, was located in a district that had once been overlooked by the city's modernization projects. The paint on the hallway walls showed chips of age, and the elevator often rattled ominously, but Helena loved the earnest sense of community here. Children played ball in the alley, neighbors greeted each other by name, and local shops offered kindness that felt increasingly rare in a fast-paced world. She washed up quickly, her mind a flurry of questions. Should she dress formally or keep it casual? Typically, for volunteering or community events, she'd wear comfortable attire, jeans, a neat blouse, and practical shoes. After all, the kids at the youth center were used to seeing her haul boxes of supplies or hunker down to help with homework. Still, the memory of Alexander's refined demeanor at the gala last night made her wonder if she should at least wear something a little nicer. In the end, she chose a pair of dark jeans and a simple peach-colored blouse, paired with sturdy flats. It was sensible yet presentable. Standing before the mirror in her cramped bathroom, she ran a brush through her hair, letting it fall in loose waves. A twinge of nerves fluttered in her stomach. More than once she reminded herself that Alexander had grown up without wealth. Maybe he'd appreciate seeing that she was genuine enough not to pretend. Before she left, she scribbled a note for her aunt, who, in her older age, often slept in past sunrise, letting her know she'd be out for the day. Then she grabbed a small tote bag containing notebooks, some craft supplies, and a few leftover pamphlets from the gala that might interest the center's staff. Stepping into the hallway, Helena took the stairs down to the street, the rickety elevator preemptively out of service. Outside, a crisp morning greeted her. She breathed it in, feeling that buoyant sensation of new beginnings. The city bustled as usual, cars rushing by, a street vendor hawking fresh-baked pastries, and passers-by hurrying to work. Helena's journey took her a few blocks to the modest cafe where she liked to grab coffee. As she waited in line, her phone buzzed. Heart skipping, she glanced down. A text from Alexander. "Morning, Helena. My meeting's at noon, so I can be at the youth center around 3 p.m. if that works. Looking forward to it. Alexander." A small smile spread across her face. she typed back a quick response. 3 p.m. is perfect. I'll see you then, and placed her order for a latte and a simple bagel. After picking them up, she found a table by the cafe's window, nibbling absently while gazing outside. She pictured how the center would be that afternoon. Kids playing ball in the rec room, older teens tinkering with donated computers, some of them finishing homework at the battered old tables. Every detail meant something to her. In a way, the youth center was a second home, one that had offered her friendship and guidance back when she was a teenager. The woman who ran it, Miss Raquel, had practically adopted half the neighborhood's kids who needed extra attention or a listening ear. Helena had first come there with a battered library book that was overdue because she couldn't afford the late fee. Miss Raquel waived the fee, offered her a volunteer position, and gave Helena a sense of belonging that changed her life. Finishing her breakfast, Helena decided to drop by the center early, help set up for the day, and fill Miss Raquel in on their high-profile visitor. 2 bus rides and a short walk later, Helena arrived at the youth center, a large brick building with a slightly faded mural painted on its side. The mural depicted children of all backgrounds playing and learning together, splashes of color illuminating an otherwise worn facade. Inside, the chipped linoleum floors and scuffed walls showed that every corner of this place was well used and well loved. Right away, a chorus of young voices drifted from a nearby room. Helena peeked in to see a group of middle schoolers gathered around an old ping-pong table, laughing as they played under flickering fluorescent lights. "Helena!" came a bright call from further down the hall. Miss Raquel, a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her early 50s, stepped forward with her usual no-nonsense expression softened by a warm grin. She wore her hair in thick braids pinned atop her head, and a large key ring dangled from her belt, keys that opened nearly every door in the building. They embraced quickly. "I heard about your big gala last night," Miss Raquel teased. "Saw the pictures online, too. You looked like a star out there. Everything go okay?" Helena laughed lightly. "Yes, it was exhausting but successful, and we lined up some serious donations for local programs. Actually," she took a breath, "Alexander Castell is coming by today. He wants to see how the centers used the funds. He'll be here around 3. Miss Raquel's eyes widened in delight and a hint of nerves. "The Alexander Castell? The man whose foundation paid for our new tutoring lounge?" "That's the one," Helena confirmed, recalling how Miss Raquel had nearly cried when she learned the center would finally get enough resources to replace ancient textbooks and buy a few computers. "Well, well," Miss Raquel murmured, crossing her arms with pride. "He's in for a treat. The kids have been asking who donated the money to fix up that lounge. They'll be thrilled to meet him if he's open to that." Helena nodded, smiling. "He definitely is. He wants to get a real sense of what we do here." Miss Raquel took Helena by the arm, leading her down the corridor. "Let's make sure everything's tidy then. Even though you know me, I believe in showing things as they are, not polishing up just for a benefactor, but let's at least pick up the clutter so he can walk without tripping on roller skates." The next couple of hours passed in a familiar rhythm. Helena and Miss Raquel tidied the main rec room, stacking puzzle boxes on shelves, straightening chairs around the battered crafts table, testing the overhead fans to ensure no light bulbs were out. A few of the older teens arrived early, helping to set up the tutoring lounge. It boasted second-hand desks, donated computers, and vibrant posters that Helena had hung to inspire confidence. Yes, you can. Reading takes you everywhere. They also prepared the small library corner where the kids could borrow books or read quietly after school. It had thrived since the new funding came through, allowing Miss Raquel to buy fresh titles and even a set of graphic novels that had the younger ones captivated. Helena carefully arranged them in neat rows, feeling a flutter in her stomach as the clock approached midday. Periodically, children and teens popped in, rummaging for balls or art supplies. Word spread quickly that someone important was visiting later. Younger kids asked if it was a movie star. The older ones teased them, claiming it was the mayor. Helena just smiled mysteriously and told them they'd see soon enough. Around 12:30, Helena and Miss Raquel stepped out to a nearby corner shop for sandwiches. They ate in the staff office where Miss Raquel kept a battered old radio playing a soft tune. Between bites, Miss Raquel eyed Helena with curiosity. "So how'd you manage to get Alexander Castell to come by personally?" Helena shrugged, feeling a slight flush. "It happened at the gala. We got talking. He seemed genuinely interested in seeing where his foundation's money goes. That's all." Miss Raquel narrowed her eyes playfully. "Uh-huh. And is that all that's going on, my dear? I remember how you used to talk about these big philanthropic donors, wondering if any of them ever truly cared. Now you look, well, excited." Helena tried to mask her smile with a sip of water. "He's different. Or at least he seems to be. The rest? I don't know. It's too soon to say anything beyond that." A wise nod was Miss Raquel's only response, though her knowing grin lingered. "All right, I'll try not to embarrass you when he arrives, promise." With that teasing line, they finished lunch and continued preparing the center for the afternoon rush. Soon, the clang of the front doors signaled the arrival of kids off from school, some bounding in with backpacks, a few dragging their feet looking for a place to unwind or do homework. Voices rose in a boisterous cacophony, and the building sprang to life. Helena alternated between greeting them, answering questions, and assisting with a small art project in the crafts room. At one point, a 10-year-old tugged her sleeve, showing her a drawing of a superhero. She praised his creativity before gently redirecting him to the next activity. Eventually, around 2:45, she found herself hovering near the main entrance. Miss Raquel, who was finishing up a phone call in the staff office, waved that she'd be right out. Helena's heart beat quicker with each minute, picturing how Alexander would feel when he saw the mismatched furniture, the scuffed floors, the chipped paint. This place was no corporate boardroom or glitzy gala hall. It was real, messy, and full of stories. At precisely 3, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside, noticeable among the battered cars parked along the curb. Helena saw Alexander step out, scanning the street with a thoughtful gaze. He wore no suit jacket today, just a crisp button-down shirt, dark trousers, and polished but not overly formal shoes. His style, while simpler, still spoke of quiet elegance. Helena stepped out onto the sidewalk to greet him. The late afternoon sunlight softened everything, and she felt a flutter of nerves again. "Hey," she said, smiling as he approached. "Right on time." Alexander returned the smile, that gentle warmth in his eyes. "I keep my promises. So this is the famous center?" She nodded, turning to face the building. "Famous, maybe not, but it's our home away from home for a lot of kids. Come on in." She led him to the door, glancing sidelong to gauge his reaction. He seemed immediately drawn in by the mural, pausing to admire the vibrant colors. "It's beautiful," he murmured, half to himself. Inside, the lobby was a swirl of energetic chatter. A group of rowdy middle schoolers barreled past, chasing a basketball they weren't supposed to dribble indoors. They nearly collided with Alexander, who sidestepped just in time, amusement flickering across his face. Helena chuckled under her breath. "Welcome to the real world," she teased lightly, leading him toward the front desk. Miss Raquel had just wrapped her phone call and stood waiting. Helena made the introductions. "Alexander, this is Miss Raquel Carter, the center's director and the reason it's still running. Miss Raquel, Mr. Castell." Miss Raquel extended a warm handshake. "A pleasure, Mr. Castell. We owe a lot to your foundation's support." Alexander shook her hand with genuine respect. "Please, call me Alexander, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the funds are helping, maybe to see what else we can do." That earnest statement made Miss Raquel's expression brighten. "In that case, you came to the right place. Let us show you around." They moved through the main corridor, stepping around children who dashed to and fro. Alexander's gaze soaked in every detail. The worn-out posters reminding kids of reading contests, the vintage vending machine that no longer worked, the volunteer-staffed mini cafeteria in the corner serving fruit snacks and sandwiches. Occasionally, a curious kid stopped to stare at him, receiving a friendly smile in return. As they walked, Miss Raquel explained the center's structure. Morning programs for toddlers, after-school homework clubs, weekend sports leagues. They paused at the tutoring lounge, where a few high schoolers were busy with algebra books under the guidance of a volunteer teacher. Modern desks and chairs replaced the old, mismatched ones, and Alexander recognized the computers installed along the wall. "This is where your donation made the biggest difference," Helena said quietly, noticing his interest. "We replaced outdated equipment, got new software, and the kids can do research or type assignments more easily. Before, they had to rely on one ancient computer that crashed every other day." A teenage girl typing at one of the new computers paused, glancing over her shoulder. She recognized Helena, then offered a shy wave to Alexander. He smiled, stepping closer. "Do they work all right? No glitches?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head, a small grin. "They're fast. Way better than the old ones. Thank you. You're that guy who donated?" "Well," Alexander corrected, "my foundation played a part, but it's really Helena and Miss Raquel who do all the actual work here." The teen's grin widened. "Still, thanks." Alexander nodded, a subtle note of humility coloring his features. Helena watched him handle the interaction with surprising ease, no trace of condescension. It confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Behind the polished CEO persona was a man who connected with people in a sincere, unforced way. After the tutoring lounge, they continued to the craft room where a handful of younger kids were painting. Miss Raquel introduced them, letting the children excitedly wave paintbrushes around. A small boy with big glasses wanted to show off his finger painting, a messy swirl of colors that he proudly declared was a monster truck. Alexander crouched down, carefully complimenting the boy's creativity. Helena couldn't help but notice how gentle he seemed, mindful not to tower over the child. With each new space, Alexander asked thoughtful questions about funding shortfalls, day-to-day struggles, volunteer coordination. Miss Raquel answered honestly, occasionally dropping hints of future needs. A better heater for winter, new lockers for the older kids. She made no demands, just offered insight. Eventually, they circled back to the main lobby. The tour had taken almost an hour, and the center bustled around them as kids came and went. Miss Raquel excused herself to check on a dispute in the rec room, leaving Helena and Alexander by a bulletin board covered in flyers for local services. Alexander glanced over the colorful notices, tutoring schedules, a battered sign for a bake sale, a hotline number for crisis counseling. He exhaled softly. "This place is incredible," he said, more to himself than to Helena. "It's not fancy, but it's alive. You can feel the sense of hope in every corner." Helena nodded, heart warmed by his earnestness. "Miss Raquel pours her soul into it. She taught me how one safe space can change a child's life." Alexander turned toward her, expression thoughtful. "I see now why you're so invested in the philanthropic side of the gala. You come from a place that understands what it means to help on a real level." A soft tingle traced through Helena's spine as she realized he'd recognized that about her, recognized her deeper motivations. "I just do what I can," she said modestly, her voice gentle. "I'm glad you came. The kids got to see the face behind the help they received. That matters." He stepped a bit closer, the hum of the center's activity swirling around them unnoticed for a moment. "I want to do more," he said quietly, the weight of his gaze settling on her. "Not just write checks, but really engage, understand their stories, maybe expand how the foundation supports places like this." Her pulse quickened, though she maintained a calm exterior. "We'd love that. Miss Raquel can definitely use more direct support, and if you have time, you could even volunteer occasionally. The kids respond well to role models who give them personal attention." Alexander arched a soft grin. "Volunteering. That's a concept I haven't explored much outside corporate events, but I think I'd like to, if you'll show me the ropes." Helena's cheeks warmed. "Absolutely." Their moment was interrupted by a shrill whistle from the rec room, presumably Miss Raquel quelling some minor chaos. The bubble of private conversation popped, and Helena recalled they stood in a busy youth center. She offered him a playful grin. "We might need to rescue her." Alexander laughed, glancing toward the door. "Lead the way." Together they moved to rejoin Miss Raquel, who had her hands on her hips, gently admonishing two teenagers for horseplay near a precarious tower of board games. Helena and Alexander stepped in, helping separate the teens and diffuse the tension. Over the next half hour, they navigated the center's after-school rush, helming an impromptu reading circle for younger ones or giving advice to older kids about upcoming exams. Amid the hustle, Helena felt a strange sense of peace whenever her eyes drifted to Alexander. Instead of being overwhelmed, he jumped right into the fray, patiently hearing out a second grader's story about a lost pet turtle or congratulating a teen on finishing a difficult math assignment. He left behind any aura of aloofness from last night's gala, choosing instead to immerse himself in the lively, messy reality of kids who didn't care about his net worth but appreciated an adult who listened. When the final wave of children departed for the evening, the staff and volunteers tidied up. Miss Raquel personally thanked Alexander for visiting. A few kids shyly asked if he'd be back, and he said yes, which prompted excited chatter about the games they'd teach him next time. Eventually, the front doors closed, and the center fell into a calmer hush. Helena walked Alexander outside. The sun had dipped below the skyline, painting the horizon in purples and reds. Streetlights flickered on, illuminating the sidewalk. A faint crispness in the air heralded an approaching evening. They paused by his waiting sedan. Alexander looked at Helena, expression tinged with wonder. "I never realized how much just being here could matter," he said softly. "Seeing their faces, it's humbling." She nodded, feeling a swelling of warmth. "Thank you for coming. It might not be the last you see of them if you keep your promise to volunteer." A light chuckle escaped him. "I intend to. I might even see if some of my employees want to help too. Corporate volunteering days or something along those lines?" "That sounds great," Helena affirmed. They lingered, neither eager to part. A distant car horn echoed along the quiet street. Helena swallowed, gathering courage. "Do you, have time for a quick coffee or dinner nearby? I know a decent diner just a few blocks away. It's nothing fancy, but the food's good, if you're not too busy." Alexander's features brightened. "I'd like that. I'll let my driver know he can take a break." Relief mixed with excitement fluttered in Helena's chest. The youth center behind them was winding down, Miss Raquel locking doors with a final wave. Meanwhile, Helena and Alexander walked side by side toward the little diner that had been a mainstay of her neighborhood for years. As they strolled, Helena felt the day's events gently settle in her mind. The delight of children at meeting a real benefactor, Alexander's earnest desire to deepen his involvement, and the unspoken bond that seemed to be growing between them. Each step felt a bit lighter, as though a new chapter was unfolding, one of open-hearted connection rather than carefully guarded distance. She cast a sidelong glance at him, noticing how he took in every detail of the neighborhood, the corner store, the elderly couple shuffling by, the laughter from a passing group of teens. He wore the same reflective expression he'd had in the center, as if seeing everyday life from a fresh perspective. Yes, Helena thought, guiding him toward the diner's neon sign shining down the block. Something was shifting, for both of them. She could sense it in his gentle curiosity and in the subtle lift of her own spirit. And in that quiet, humbling realization, she found hope blossoming. Maybe two lives, so different on paper, could intersect in the most human way, through genuine care, through shared purpose, and through the tender flicker of a possible love that neither had dared imagine before. The small neighborhood diner that Helena guided Alexander to was a far cry from the lavish restaurants he frequented on business trips. Its neon sign cast a mild red glow across the sidewalk, announcing, "Charlene's Diner, open late." The windows revealed a snug interior of vinyl booths, warm lighting, and a chalkboard menu above the counter that boasted daily specials like meatloaf and apple pie. It was a place most wealthy elites would pass by without a second look, but tonight it felt precisely right. Helena led the way inside, where they were greeted by a clatter of plates and the smell of fresh coffee. A smiling waitress with a tired but kindly expression waved at Helena. "Grab any booth, hun," she called. "I'll be right with you." Alexander took in the old-fashioned decor, the checkered floors, the laminated menus, the glass case with pies spinning slowly on display. Unlike the gleaming sophistication of high-end venues, it radiated something warmer, authenticity. He found himself drawn to the unpretentious hum of conversation, the sight of a child coloring on a placemat while her mother sipped coffee. They chose a booth near a window, the vinyl squeaking as they sat. Helena smiled, setting her tote bag on the seat beside her. Alexander slipped out of his jacket, draping it along the back of the booth. The overhead light swayed slightly each time a customer entered or left, giving the place a soft flicker that felt oddly comforting. "This is one of my favorite haunts," Helena admitted, resting her elbows on the table. "When I was in high school, I'd come here after volunteering at the center, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. We didn't have much money, but the owner was always generous. If I had only a few bucks, she'd still find a way to give me a warm meal." Alexander's gaze swept across the diner, noting a middle-aged cook visible through the kitchen window, calmly flipping burgers. The waitress bustled from table to table, pouring coffee refills. "I can see why you like it," he said quietly. "It's welcoming." He was still processing how seamlessly Helena navigated these spaces, from a glitzy gala to a modest diner. In a single day, she'd shown him more of the city's genuine spirit than he'd observed in months of polished meetings. He admired it, and he wanted to learn from it. The waitress, whose name tag read Laura, swung by with 2 menus. "Hey there, Ms. Helena. Good to see you. And you must be a new face," she said, nodding at Alexander. She seemed pleasantly curious rather than fawning. Evidently, she didn't recognize him as any sort of celebrity. "Hi, Laura," Helena replied. "This is my friend Alexander. He's visiting from across town." A subtle understatement that made Alexander smile. He wanted a real taste of the neighborhood, so I figured I'd show him the best of it. Laura chuckled. "Well, you picked the right place. You want coffee to start?" They agreed, and soon 2 steaming mugs appeared. After a quick glance at the menu, Helena recommended the homemade chili or the classic fried chicken, but cautioned that the portions were hearty. Alexander settled on a grilled chicken sandwich and a side of fries, while Helena went for the diner's signature chili bowl. The waitress jotted down their orders and hurried off. Silence fell between them, but it was a companionable kind of quiet. Outside the window, streetlights illuminated the sidewalk. A man hustled past on a bicycle carrying groceries. Helena felt her cheeks warm with a strange mix of comfort and nerves. This was the first time they'd spent together outside of an organized event or philanthropic cause. It was personal in a way that made her heart flutter. "I'm glad you could come," she said softly. "I wasn't sure if you'd be too tired or have more meetings." Alexander sipped his coffee, nodding. "I've had busier days than this. Besides, I wanted to keep learning about your world." There was no condescension in his tone, only genuine respect. "After seeing the youth center, I realized I've been so wrapped up in corporate expansions that I rarely, maybe never, just spend time in places like this. Feels like a missing piece." Helena smiled, eyes shining with empathy. "You built a huge empire. That takes focus. But I'll admit, It's nice watching you step away from all that, even briefly. He tilted his head, curiosity lighting his features. You seem so at ease. Where does that come from? She let out a gentle laugh, considering the question. At ease might be too generous. I get anxious plenty, especially at big fancy events. But I guess I learned early on that life's simpler pleasures, like good food or seeing a kid's face light up when they learn something new, bring me real joy. It's not about wealth. It's about belonging, I guess. Alexander absorbed that. Belonging, he repeated. I never felt like I belonged anywhere, even when success came. It was always about the next goal, the next victory. Truth be told, it's lonely at the top. Her gaze softened. You have family or friends to share it with? He hesitated, swirling his coffee cup. My parents passed a few years ago, one after the other. I have some distant relatives, but we're not close. My friend Trenton is probably my closest companion. He's also an investor, but it's more of a business friendship, if that makes sense. A gentle ache formed in Helena's chest. I'm sorry about your parents, she said softly, and that you feel lonely. I can't imagine how isolating that might be. He nodded, appreciating her empathy. It is what it is. But you? It seems like you have real connections. He thought of Miss Raquel, how warmly she'd greeted Helena at the center, of how comfortable Helena was here in the diner, greeting staff by name. Helena shrugged lightly. It took time to build. I grew up around here and there wasn't a lot of money, but we had each other's backs. My aunt raised me after my mom passed. My dad was never in the picture. The youth center was my second family. That's partly why I ended up in event organizing. I wanted to be involved in something bigger, to bring resources here. He offered a small, admiring smile. Before he could respond, the waitress returned with their plates. Helena's chili arrived steaming in a ceramic bowl, accompanied by a slice of cornbread. Alexander's sandwich looked simple but mouth-watering. A grilled chicken breast topped with fresh lettuce, tomatoes, and a swirl of sauce. They thanked the waitress, who gave them a cheerful, "Enjoy," and moved on. Helena inhaled the aroma, which reminded her of comforting family meals. She reached for a spoon. Their chili is the best I've had. I come here whenever I need a pick-me-up. Alexander took a bite of his sandwich and let out an appreciative hum. This is fantastic, he said, sounding surprised. A playful grin tugged at Helena's lips. Don't tell me you doubted a neighborhood diner could produce good food? He chuckled, shaking his head. I just didn't know what to expect. It's better than half the fancy restaurants I've been to, and the atmosphere is more real. They settled into a comfortable rhythm of eating and talking. Alexander asked about the diner's backstory, and Helena recounted how Charlene, the original owner, had started it 40 years ago with a single stove and her grandmother's recipes. She'd passed it on to her niece a decade ago, who kept it mostly unchanged. Between bites, Helena found the courage to ask more about Alexander's philanthropic foundation. What sparked him to create it? How he chose which causes to support. She learned that, as a child, he'd grown up watching his parents volunteer as much as they could, despite not having much money. My mother used to say the greatest wealth is the ability to uplift someone else, he explained. I guess that stayed with me. Conversation flowed like water, unforced and genuine. They discovered little pockets of shared interest, a love for old films. She adored the classics. He admitted to sneaking them in after a stressful day. A curiosity about travel. She dreamed of visiting Europe someday. He'd been all over for business but realized he rarely explored beyond hotels and conference centers. In these revelations, they found pieces of themselves that resonated, one in the other. Occasionally, Helena's eyes flicked to the window, noticing the darkening sky. She'd glance at the time on her phone, half expecting an abrupt end if Alexander had another commitment. But he seemed relaxed, in no hurry at all, finishing his meal and sipping coffee refills like he had all the time in the world. When they both reached a comfortable lull, Helena pushed away her half-empty chili bowl, satisfied. I need to ask Miss Raquel if she wants me to drop off anything to the seniors' community center tomorrow, she mused aloud. We have leftover paint sets that might be perfect for them. Alexander listened intently. May I come along? She blinked. To the seniors' center? You want to go? He set his coffee down. I do. This might sound impulsive, but I'm realizing how little I engage with the actual world I live in. You've shown me one youth center and one diner, and I already feel more connected than I have in ages. I'd like to keep seeing, if you don't mind me tagging along. A warm rush suffused Helena's chest. The sincerity in his request was disarming. I'd like that, she said, an affectionate note in her voice. Although I warn you, seniors can be quite frank. They'll say whatever's on their mind. He laughed lightly, nodding. I can handle honesty. Their conversation paused as Laura returned to collect plates. She asked if they wanted dessert, fresh apple pie or banana cream, but both shook their heads, too full. Helena requested the bill, but Alexander reached for it first, giving Helena a soft look that discouraged protest. You showed me your favorite diner, he said. Let me treat you this time. She was about to argue, but a part of her recalled how she often had to watch every dollar. If he was offering kindly, maybe it was all right to accept. She relented, smiling in gratitude. Thank you. He covered the meal with cash, leaving a generous tip that made Laura's eyes widen momentarily before she gushed. Thanks, folks. Y'all come back soon. Outside, the air felt cooler with a light breeze carrying the distant hum of traffic. Street lamps highlighted the worn sidewalks and cast elongated shadows. Most shops had closed, their shutters down, leaving the diner's neon glow the brightest beacon on the block. Helena walked him back to his sedan, which was still parked near the curb. The city felt calm at this hour, a hush that lent a cozy intimacy to their quiet conversation. When they reached the car, Alexander paused, turning to face her under a faint circle of lamplight. This was nice, he said softly. A genuine evening. Thank you for showing me around, both the center and a piece of your neighborhood. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Helena replied, heart fluttering. She could see the reflection of the streetlight in his eyes, warm and earnest. You saw the real me tonight, I guess. No fancy gowns or forced smiles. He gave a slight, self-conscious smile. I prefer real. The gala was, well, I'm used to that kind of setting. But this, he motioned at the quiet street, the old diner's sign flickering behind them. This is new, and it feels more meaningful. A faint swirl of anticipation curled in Helena's stomach. She was aware they were standing quite close, aware of the gentle hush in the air. She recalled the feeling of dancing with him at the gala, a moment that had vibrated with unspoken potential. Now, that same sense of possibility tingled along her skin. Do you? She started, but paused, uncertain what she meant to ask. Did she want to see him again in a non-volunteer setting? Was she brave enough to cross the line between new friendship and something deeper? He caught her hesitation and stepped half a pace forward. Helena, he said, voice hushed. I've met countless people in my life, but you, from the moment we collided at the gala, something felt different. I don't mean to rush anything, it's just that I'd like to get to know you better, beyond the philanthropy, beyond the small talk. Her cheeks glowed, a wave of relief mingling with excitement. I'd like that too, she whispered. I'm not sure where it'll go, but yes, let's figure it out together. He nodded, an almost boyish smile crossing his face. For a heartbeat, it felt like they might lean closer, an impulse shimmering just beneath the surface. But then Alexander's driver discreetly cleared his throat from inside the car, reminding them of the real world once more. A soft, shared laugh diffused the moment. Helena said goodbye, stepping back. Drive safe, she murmured. and I'll call you about tomorrow's seniors visit?" "Please do," he replied. "Thank you again, Helena." They parted with the hush of something unspoken lingering between them, an unspoken promise that life had just opened a door neither had expected. Helena watched the sedan glide away under the streetlights, her heart thrumming with more hope than she'd felt in a long time. For Alexander, as he settled into the back seat and watched Helena's figure recede, he realized how foreign it felt to care this deeply, this quickly. Yet it wasn't all romance. It was also respect for her world, admiration for her values, and a genuine desire to share his life in ways he had never allowed before. As the car merged into the main thoroughfare, he closed his eyes and breathed in the memory of her voice, the warmth of her expression. Tomorrow beckoned with the promise of new experiences, new people to meet, and maybe the blossoming of a bond that no corporate deal could ever replicate. A gentle breeze rustled the thin curtains of Helena's apartment as she tapped a quick text to Alexander. "Meeting Miss Raquel at the youth center in an hour to pick up those paint sets for the seniors center. See you there?" It was mid-morning, and the sun was already streaming in, illuminating every cozy corner of her living space. She hummed to herself, amazed at how easily her life had taken this new, unexpected turn. Just days ago, she'd never have guessed that Alexander Castell, billionaire CEO, self-made mogul, would be accompanying her on regular errands around the neighborhood. Yet here they were, planning an outing to deliver leftover art supplies to a community center for seniors. Her phone chimed a moment later. "Perfect. I'll meet you outside at 11. Can't wait." Smiling, Helena slipped her phone into her bag and glanced at the small mirror by the door. Today she wore a casual blue sundress and sandals, feeling it was both practical for the day's tasks and a little cheerful. No reason not to dress nicely, she told herself. Besides, with Alexander around, she found she wanted to present her best self, though she sensed he valued honesty above any facade. Before she left, she ducked into her aunt's room. Her aunt lay on the bed, propped up by pillows and reading a well-worn novel. "You're off again?" her aunt asked gently, sliding on her reading glasses. "Yes," Helena replied. "We're delivering supplies to the seniors center." She hesitated. "I'll be out for most of the day, probably. Don't worry, I'll bring dinner if I'm late." Her aunt offered a teasing grin. "Seems you've been busier than usual lately, dear. This new philanthropic mission must be keeping you on your toes, or is it a certain someone in particular?" Helena laughed, feeling a mild flush. Well, I'm enjoying the work." Her aunt patted her hand. "Go on. Just remember to take care of yourself, too." With a warm goodbye, Helena headed outside. The city air carried the scent of fresh bakery bread and distant traffic fumes. She walked the now familiar few blocks toward the youth center. Along the way, she passed the diner from the night before and recalled the soft glow of neon that had lit her conversation with Alexander. A flutter of something, excitement, maybe hope, accompanied the memory. Reaching the youth center, Helena spotted Miss Raquel lugging a heavy box toward the curb. She jogged over. "Let me help," she offered, grasping one side. "Thanks," Miss Raquel said, exhaling with relief. "These are the paint sets and some craft supplies left over from the last donation drive. The seniors said they could use more art materials." They set the box down on the sidewalk. "Alexander texted that he's on his way," Helena mentioned, trying to keep her voice casual. "Oh, I'm sure he is," Miss Raquel teased, arching an eyebrow. "He's been here every day since that first visit, dropping off new sports equipment and even some healthy snacks. I'm telling you, the kids are talking about him like he's a celebrity." Helena felt a surge of warmth. Alexander had indeed thrown himself into the center's happenings more than she'd expected. The day before, he'd brought brand new basketballs and a stack of reading books for the lounge. "He really does seem invested," she murmured. "Invested in more than just the center, if you ask me," Miss Raquel said pointedly, her eyes twinkling. He's got that look whenever you're around, like he's thankful for every minute." Helena's cheeks glowed, but she didn't deny it. Things had felt electric between them the last few days, an unfolding closeness that neither could fully explain, but both seemed willing to explore. Before she could respond, a sleek black sedan pulled up, gliding to a stop at the curb. Alexander stepped out in casual attire, khaki pants and a simple collared shirt, looking as unassuming as a billionaire could. He offered them both a bright smile, then moved to help with the box. "Good morning," he greeted, glancing from Miss Raquel to Helena. "Is this everything for the seniors' center?" "Just about," Miss Raquel replied. "Thank you for helping deliver it. Usually I drop it off myself, but I'm juggling about 5 tasks at once. If you can handle it, I'd be grateful." "We've got it," Helena assured her. "No problem." Miss Raquel handed them one more small bag. "These are crocheted lap blankets the kids made during arts and crafts. Some seniors loved them." She paused, resting a hand on Helena's shoulder. "Take your time. I'll manage here." After brief goodbyes, Alexander helped Helena stow the supplies in the trunk. She slid into the passenger seat. He took the driver's seat, waving off the idea of bringing a chauffeur. "I want to navigate these streets on my own," he'd said earlier, explaining that he'd recently dismissed his driver for the day. They set off with the windows partially down. As they drove through Helena's neighborhood, she pointed out local landmarks, a tiny grocery store owned by a couple who always donated leftover produce to the youth center, a mural that read, "Hope lives here," and a park where she used to play after school. Alexander asked questions, genuinely fascinated. 15 minutes later, they pulled up to the seniors' community center, a squat brick building with a small garden out front, rows of flowers tended by elderly residents. Helena guided Alexander around to the side door, where a cheerful sign read, "Welcome, friends." They carried the boxes and bags inside, passing through a short hallway decorated with old photographs from decades past. A volunteer greeted them. "Oh, hi, Helena." She was a middle-aged woman named Carmen, whom Helena had known for years. "Thank you for bringing more supplies. The seniors were excited when I told them you had leftover paints." She eyed Alexander curiously but welcomed him with a smile. "I'm Carmen. You must be the new friend?" "Alexander," he introduced, offering a handshake. "Nice to meet you." They followed Carmen into a recreation room where a few seniors gathered around tables, some painting small figurines, others engaged in quiet conversation. The walls were decorated with their artwork, landscapes, portraits, even humorous, cartoonish sketches. A sense of peaceful camaraderie pervaded the space. Helena and Alexander set the boxes down gently. Immediately, a few seniors looked up, curious about the newcomers. One gentleman wearing a cap embroidered with his old military rank nodded. "You're the folks bringing the new supplies?" "Yes," Helena said, smiling wide. "We had extras from the youth center plus some crocheted blankets. Miss Raquel thought you could use them." The man's eyes lit. "Perfect timing. I'm working on painting miniature houses for the charity sale next month." He gestured to a table covered in tiny model buildings, each delicately painted. Helena recognized them from prior visits. Despite arthritic hands, the man's brushstrokes were amazingly precise. Alexander approached, fascinated. "These are incredible," he said softly, leaning in to admire the detailing on a miniature front porch. The older man grinned. "Thank you, son. Painting helps me keep my mind and hands active. Means a lot to have fresh supplies." Carmen introduced the rest of the group, a retired teacher crocheting by the window, a former librarian painting watercolor scenes of her memories, and a pair of elderly sisters who giggled over crosswords. Their straightforward warmth and the stories they shared touched Alexander deeply. One of the sisters teased him about his fancy shirt, and he took it in stride, laughing along. Helena felt a surge of pride watching him. Despite the differences in age, background, and lifestyle, he conversed with them easily, asking about their day-to-day routines, their interests. The reticence she might have expected from a wealthy magnate simply wasn't there. He was respectful, attentive, and curious, just as he'd been with the kids. After distributing the art supplies, Helena and Alexander lingered, drifting from one table to another. She noticed how gently he spoke to the retired teacher, who explained her latest painting project was an homage to the small town she grew up in. Meanwhile, Helena listened to one of the crocheting sisters share an anecdote from her youth. The center buzzed with a subdued sense of purpose, a place where creativity intertwined with companionship. Eventually, Carmen returned with coffee and store-bought cookies, insisting Helena and Alexander sit for a break. They obliged, taking seats in a corner. Helena sipped her coffee, scanning the room with contentment. "They're so sweet, aren't they?" she said softly. "All they want is someone to listen to them, to care." Alexander nodded. "They remind me of my parents in some ways. Dad was always painting. Mom crocheted during quiet evenings." His gaze lingered on an older man, hunched over a painting of a tree in autumn colors. "I regret never showing them what I accomplished, you know? They passed just before my business really took off." Helena placed a comforting hand on his arm. "They'd be proud of you, not just for the success, but for this, who you are with people." He offered a faint smile, eyes momentarily distant. "I hope so." Then his expression cleared, and he turned to her. "Thanks for letting me join these visits. It's changing my perspective." She squeezed his arm gently. "I'm glad." When they finished their coffee, they said their goodbyes. The seniors, delighted with the new supplies, urged them to return soon, maybe to help with painting, crocheting, or simply to chat. Alexander promised he would try. As Helena and Alexander stepped outside into bright sunshine, she saw the thoughtful look on his face. They walked to the car, the warmth of midday enveloping them. Once more, she felt that wave of companionship that had been growing steadily. After loading the empty boxes, they lingered beside the vehicle. She wanted to ask if he had more time to explore the neighborhood, or maybe to grab lunch, but an uncertain pang quivered in her chest. Would she be overstepping? Alexander seemed to sense the same possibility. I don't have pressing obligations until later," he offered softly. "If you'd like to continue showing me around, maybe there's something else you love about this part of town?" Helena's heart lifted. "There's a park nearby with a pond. Kids sometimes feed ducks there. It's nothing spectacular, but it's peaceful." He smiled, unlocking the car. "Peaceful sounds perfect." And so they drove to the park, an unplanned detour that somehow felt utterly right. They strolled along a narrow path lined with old oak trees, exchanging thoughts about childhood memories, future plans, and philanthropic dreams. Occasionally, Helena would pause to point out a bird or a small patch of wildflowers, and Alexander would study them with the same attentive curiosity he gave to everything else in her world. They reached a small pond where a few ducks floated lazily. Helena found a bench shaded by a willow, and they sat side by side. In the distance, a mother pushed a stroller along the path, and an elderly couple ambled arm in arm. Leaves rustled overhead in the soft breeze. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, his arm resting along the back of the bench, "for showing me life, real life, not just spreadsheets and headlines." She turned toward him, her expression warm. "That's the kind of world I know best. I'm happy you want to see it." Pausing, she let the moment breathe. "I'm grateful for your openness. You could have stayed distant, but here you are." He glanced at her, a tender light in his eyes. "I don't want distance, not with you." Gently, as though testing uncharted waters, he brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. A flush rushed to her face at the brief but intimate gesture. Her voice softened. "Alexander." Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the quiet. She sighed apologetically, retrieving it. It was Meredith, her boss, asking about follow-up plans for the next charity event. Helena quickly typed a message back, promising she'd handle it soon. Alexander watched, a wry smile curving his lips. "The real world calls, huh?" She slipped the phone away. Always does, but it can wait. She leaned back on the bench, letting the hush of the pond settle over them again. "We can spare a few more minutes here." He nodded, and they sank into a comfortable silence, listening to the gentle quacks of ducks, the distant hum of the city that never fully disappeared. In that pause, Helena felt the delicate beginnings of closeness, a sense that perhaps she and Alexander were forging more than a friendship, more than a philanthropic alliance. It was a fragile bond, tested by their vastly different backgrounds, yet somehow grounded in mutual respect and an earnest longing to understand each other's worlds. She didn't know where it would lead, whether it would end up just a fleeting chapter or bloom into something lasting. But in that moment, sitting together by a quiet pond, she felt hope. And for Alexander, used to endless demands and an unceasing quest for success, the tranquility of Helena's world offered a promise of belonging he'd never known was missing. They breathed in tandem, side by side, and somewhere, in the hush of fluttering leaves, the unspoken promise of tomorrow glimmered, an open door to a future shaped by compassion, discovery, and perhaps, if they dared to trust it, love. A restless wind swayed the branches of the oak trees as Alexander and Helena left the peaceful pond, heading back to his car. The day had offered them a fleeting glimpse of tranquility, a pocket of time stolen from busy schedules and phone notifications. Yet as they walked, they could sense the city's rumble waiting to fold them back into its routine. When they arrived at the sedan, Helena hesitated at the passenger door. She'd grown used to these spontaneous outings with Alexander, an unplanned drive to the seniors' center, a shared coffee, lingering conversations by the pond. But the thought of returning to her usual tasks felt oddly dissonant now. Alexander noticed. "Do you need a ride home?" he asked, gently, placing the keys in the ignition but not starting the engine. "Or anywhere else?" She checked her phone. Meredith had sent another message with updates on potential donors. Helena shook her head lightly. "Maybe just drop me off near the event office. I should meet with my boss about the next charity fundraiser." She paused. "Unless you're busy. I don't want to impose." He cast her an amused look. "Impose, Helena. I'm the one who keeps tagging along to your plans." She laughed, sliding into the passenger seat. "Point taken." They drove through winding streets, letting the hum of the engine accompany their quiet conversation. They talked about the seniors they'd met, the jokes shared, and how even the simplest gestures, like fresh art supplies, could brighten someone's day. Helena recalled one crocheting sister who had insisted that Alexander try on a half-finished scarf just to get a sense of the color. He'd obliged, smiling with genuine interest. The memory made Helena chuckle. Alexander turned at a stoplight. "I admire how you navigate all these different worlds, Helena. One day you're at a black tie gala, the next you're handing out crochet yarn to senior citizens." She angled toward him. "I used to think those spheres couldn't coexist. It's either high society galas or humble community centers. But meeting you is proving they can intersect. Maybe that's how real change happens, bridging all sorts of people." He listened, impressed. "Exactly. My entire life, I've kept everything in compartments. Business expansions, then separate philanthropic projects, then personal life. Never overlapping. But seeing your approach, it's making me realize synergy isn't just a corporate word. It's about letting compassion permeate every part of what we do." They reached a busy intersection. Helena pointed out the large building on the left, a mid-rise with a sign that read, "East River Event Coordination." That was the office from which Meredith ran her operations, and where Helena worked most days when not on site for an event. Alexander pulled over, hazard lights blinking as a few cars honked impatiently. He turned to Helena. "You sure you don't want me to come in and say hi? I could meet your boss properly. not just the rushed moments at the gala. A flicker of gratitude warmed her chest, but she also knew how Meredith could be in the middle of planning mania, especially if they had a big fundraising dinner soon. It might be chaos in there, but if you don't mind potential madness, he smiled. I've dealt with plenty of boardroom madness. I can handle it. Grinning, Helena agreed. They found a parking spot farther down the block and walked back together. The sidewalk bustled with office workers, a few couriers weaving on bicycles, and people ducking into coffee shops. The glass doors of East River Event Coordination opened to a small lobby. An anxious-looking intern behind the reception desk nearly dropped a stack of flyers upon seeing them. Hello, Ms. Robert, the intern stammered, glancing at Alexander with wide eyes. Ms. Meredith is in her office. She's expecting you. They headed down a short hallway lined with framed posters from past events, lavish weddings, corporate conferences, even a rock music festival. At the end was a glass-walled corner office where Meredith sat behind a desk cluttered with color-coded binders and decorative figurines. She was on the phone, speaking animatedly. Catching sight of Helena, she waved them in, wrapping up her call. Yes, we'll finalize the vendor contracts tomorrow, she said briskly into the receiver. All right, good, bye. She hung up and looked at Helena with relief. You made it, finally. We've got 3 new leads on potential donors, and she paused mid-sentence, recognizing Alexander. Oh, Mr. Castell. A touch of genuine surprise softened her typically stern features. I didn't realize you'd be visiting today. He extended a friendly hand. Please call me Alexander. I've been tagging along with Helena, seeing the city's philanthropic corners. Meredith accepted the handshake, still a bit stunned. Well, welcome to our humble event coordination HQ. It's not as glamorous as the gala hall, but it's where the magic happens. She gestured at the surrounding offices, boxes of pamphlets and staffers rushing by with phones pressed to their ears. Helena stepped in. You said something about new donor leads? Meredith nodded, handing her a small stack of printed emails. 2 local businesses and 1 high-profile individual are interested in sponsoring the upcoming Children's Hospital benefit. They were impressed by how smoothly the Luxuria Gala turned out, and by that speech, Alexander. He raised an eyebrow, scanning the top page Helena held. So my impromptu speech ended up drawing more support? Exactly, Meredith confirmed. People noticed the sincerity behind it. A lot of events feel so transactional, but your words resonated. Now they want to meet with us, see if they can partner or donate. Alexander looked at Helena with a subtle grin. I'd be happy to lend a hand or speak with them if that helps. The more donors, the better. Meredith perked up. If you're offering, absolutely. Even a brief conference call or lunch meeting could seal the deal. Let's schedule something soon. She tapped at her calendar on her monitor, glancing back at Helena. We've also got to finalize the theme for that children's hospital event. I'm torn between a whimsical carnival vibe or a modern tech-forward design. The hospital loves the idea of playful elements for the kids, but the donors might prefer a sleek approach. Helena pursed her lips, considering. Maybe we can mix them. A whimsical carnival theme, but with a polished execution. Fairy lights, photo booths, colorful decor, yet still sophisticated enough for donors to feel it's a premium affair. Meredith nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that might strike the right balance. Good idea. She turned to Alexander. See what I mean? Helena can translate big visions into workable concepts. She's invaluable. He shot Helena a warm look. I never doubted it. A hint of a pleased flush crossed Helena's cheeks. She cleared her throat. So, do we want to schedule those sponsor calls for next week? I can coordinate times that suit everyone. Meredith nodded. Yes. And I'll need a rough concept design. If you have time tomorrow, Helena, we can start drafting the layout, unless you're busy volunteering. Helena glanced at Alexander, trying to gauge his plans, too. He spoke up. We do have a youth center meeting in the early afternoon about the upcoming sports equipment donation, but that's a quick update. After that, you're free, right? He looked at Helena for confirmation. She managed a light chuckle. Yes, I should be. So tomorrow late afternoon I can come in for design work. Meredith seemed intrigued by how seamlessly they included each other's schedules. Wonderful. We'll finalize details then. A phone rang on her desk and she gave them a quick apologetic look before picking up. Meredith, how can I help? She mouthed to Helena and Alexander. Give me a minute. Helena signaled that they'd step out, and Meredith nodded. They left the office and wandered into a nearby break room, where a small coffee machine hummed on a counter. Staffers popped in and out, exchanging quick greetings. No one seemed overly starstruck by Alexander, perhaps too busy to notice, or maybe they just assumed he was another well-dressed client. Standing by the coffee machine, Helena rummaged through the emails Meredith had handed her. Alexander leaned against the counter, quietly observing the environment. Your workplace is as hectic as mine, he remarked with a grin, just with more color and fewer suits. Helena laughed. Yes, we thrive on chaos, but it's good chaos most of the time. He took a breath. What's your next big career goal? Ever think about running your own event company or focusing purely on philanthropic events? Her eyes flicked up, startled by the question. I've dreamed about it, actually. Maybe one day launching a nonprofit or an event agency dedicated solely to charitable causes. But for now, I'm learning from Meredith, building connections. I still have a lot to figure out. Alexander nodded. Well, if you ever decide to branch out, I have resources that could help. Mentorship, capital, whatever you need. The sincerity in his tone made her heart flutter. That's generous, Alexander. But I want to make sure I'm truly ready before I take that leap. I'd hate to risk other people's donations on my inexperience. He reached out to squeeze her hand gently, a brief moment of affection that made her stomach flip. I understand. But don't underestimate yourself. You have a gift for bringing people together. A staff member wandered in, rummaging for sugar packets, and the private moment dispersed. Helena withdrew her hand, though her pulse still thrummed. She swallowed, glancing at the time. Should we let Meredith wrap up? We can see if she needs anything else. Alexander nodded, but before they headed out, the staffer turned and did a double take. Oh, excuse me, are you Alexander Castell? He offered a polite smile. Yes, I am. The staffer's eyes lit up. I recognized you from an article about the gala. Thanks for your philanthropic work. My aunt's hospital got some of your foundation's funds for new machines. Alexander shook the staffer's hand. I'm glad the foundation could help. Best wishes to your aunt, too. Helena noticed how comfortable he seemed with such interactions now, a far cry from the distant figure she'd once seen in the tabloids. The transformation was real and touched every aspect of his demeanor. They returned to Meredith's office, who was just ending her phone call. All right, she exhaled. I'll set up those calls for next week. Helena, you handle the scheduling. Alexander, I'll send you an email with potential meeting dates. Sounds good, Alexander agreed. He glanced at Helena. Shall I give you a ride somewhere else, or do you need to stay? Meredith looked between them, bemused but not disapproving. Helena, I'm fine here. We have a staff meeting in an hour, but it's mostly housekeeping. You're not required. I can fill you in later. Helena hesitated only a moment. All right. I'll let you get back to it. Text me if anything urgent comes up. With that, they left the building, stepping into the mid-afternoon sunlight. The bustle of the office corridor gave way to the swirl of city traffic. Helena drew a long breath, scanning the sky. I should probably get groceries soon, she mused. My fridge is alarmingly empty. Alexander chuckled. I can take you to the market if you want. She blinked in surprise. You're offering to go grocery shopping with me? He shrugged with a playful grin. Why not? I've never had a reason to do normal errands before. Could be illuminating. Helena laughed softly. Then let's do it. I need to pick up some veggies and basics for my aunt anyway. They got back into his car, driving a short distance to a local farmer's market, an open-air space with stalls selling fresh produce, bread, honey, flowers. Alexander parked and they strolled in, greeted by a riot of colors: tomatoes gleaming red, baskets of fragrant herbs, bundles of leafy greens. Vendors called out cheerful greetings, offering samples of peaches and berries. Helena guided Alexander through the stalls, selecting ripe tomatoes, a small bag of potatoes, onions, and a few green peppers. She pointed out the stall that sold homemade jams, praising the strawberry rhubarb flavor. Alexander tasted a sample on a cracker, nodding appreciatively. "That's amazing." They meandered deeper into the market, pausing to watch a street musician plucking a guitar. Helena tossed a few coins into his open case, smiling at the gentle melody. Alexander joined her in listening for a moment before continuing on. The entire scene felt worlds away from corporate skyscrapers and boardrooms, a realm of authentic human connection. Helena found a vendor selling lavender-infused soaps, something her aunt loved. As she considered the options, Alexander quietly stepped beside her. "Pick what you like," he said. "My treat." She gave him a friendly nudge. "I don't need you to pay for my groceries." He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, but I can at least buy your aunt's favorite soap. Consider it a small thank you for letting me roam around your life unannounced." Laughing, Helena relented. She chose a bar of lavender rosemary soap, and Alexander paid the vendor with a grin. They moved on, eventually amassing enough groceries for a week's worth of simple meals. Laden with bags, they headed back to the car. As Alexander unlocked the trunk, he breathed a contented sigh. "This might be one of the nicest afternoons I've had in a long while." She arranged the bags carefully so none would crush the tomatoes. "It's just normal day-to-day stuff," she noted, shutting the trunk. "You do realize that, right?" He caught her gaze, sincerity shining. "I do, and that's exactly why it's special." They slid into the car, the interior warm from the sun. Helena directed him toward her apartment building, letting the hum of the engine lull them into another gentle quiet. Her mind drifted to how easily he'd embraced her everyday life, from the youth center to the seniors center and now a bustling farmer's market. Despite all outward appearances, the wealth, the high-profile identity, Alexander seemed genuinely at home here. Pulling up to her building, Alexander parked by the curb, ignoring the impatient honk of a taxi behind them. "Need help carrying these up?" Helena considered. "Sure, if you don't mind climbing 3 flights. The elevator's out again." He laughed lightly. "I'm up for the challenge." So, groceries in hand, they trudged up the worn stairs. On the 3rd-floor landing, Helena fished out her keys and opened her apartment door. It was modest but tidy, with warm light filtering through lace curtains and a few potted plants on the sill. Alexander stepped inside, scanning the cozy living area, books stacked on a small shelf, a crochet blanket draped over the sofa, her aunt's handiwork. "This is nice," he said softly, setting the grocery bags on a small kitchen counter. "Feels inviting." "Thanks," she replied, glancing around with fresh eyes. "It's not much, but it's home." He shrugged off any notion of minimalism being a problem. "I like it. It has character." They unpacked the groceries together, placing vegetables in a tiny fridge, fruit in a colorful bowl on the counter, the soap set aside for her aunt. In the quiet lull of their teamwork, Helena realized how naturally he fit into her space. It didn't feel forced or awkward. If anything, a calm sense of belonging settled over them both. Her aunt's voice carried from the hallway. "Helena, is that you?" She appeared in the doorway, wearing comfortable slippers and a cardigan. Her gaze landed on Alexander, eyebrows rising with mild surprise. "Oh, hello there." "Hello, ma'am," he greeted respectfully, stepping forward. "I'm Alexander. It's nice to meet you." She offered him a warm smile, though her eyes flicked toward Helena with curiosity. "Nice to meet you, too. I heard a bit about you. Philanthropic fellow, right?" Alexander nodded, a faint grin at the description. "Trying my best." Helena's aunt patted him on the arm. "Good. We need more philanthropic fellows around here." Then she turned to Helena, eyes dancing with mischief. "You picked up dinner, I hope?" Helena bit back a smirk, rummaging through a bag. "We got fresh veggies and bread from the market. I can cook something simple. Alexander, do you want to stay for dinner? It won't be fancy, just a quick meal." A flicker of gratitude lit his expression, as if the invitation touched him more than she realized. "I'd love to." Her aunt nodded approvingly, then shuffled off, giving them a moment of privacy. Helena opened her small pantry, scanning for rice or pasta. She decided on a basic stir-fry with peppers, onions, and chicken. "It'll take me about half an hour," she said apologetically. "I hope you're okay with that." He leaned against the counter, watching her with a gentle fondness. "I've got all the time in the world." And so they settled into an unplanned evening routine, Helena chopping vegetables while Alexander set the table in the quaint living room. The overhead light flickered occasionally, a reminder that her building was old, but the soft chatter and the aroma of sizzling onions lent a comforting ambiance. From the hallway, her aunt listened to the TV at a low volume, occasionally chiming in with cheerful remarks. As Helena stirred the contents of the pan, Alexander peeked over her shoulder, curiosity evident. "Need any help?" "You can slice the bread," she offered, handing him a small cutting board and knife. Together they assembled a simple but hearty meal. The conversation fell into easy banter. She teased him about handling a bread knife instead of a corporate contract, and he joked that he was more nervous about cutting slices evenly than closing a $1 million deal. When the meal was ready, they all settled around a small wooden table. Helena, her aunt, and Alexander. The food might have been modest, but Alexander ate with clear appreciation, complimenting Helena's cooking. Her aunt peppered him with friendly questions about his upbringing, the philanthropic work, even what hobbies he had. Helena watched his gentle patience with every query, her heart warming at the sight of them chatting like old friends. Eventually, the plates were cleared, and Helena's aunt excused herself to retire to her bedroom, leaving the two of them lingering at the table. The city lights outside cast dancing reflections on the window pane. A comfortable hush enveloped them. Helena placed her elbows on the table, chin in her hands, studying him in the soft lamplight. "Thank you," she murmured, "for the simplest things, visiting seniors, carrying groceries, sharing dinner." He reached across the table, tracing his fingers gently over hers. "I should be thanking you," he said quietly. "Until now, my life was measured in deadlines and expansions. You've shown me how meaningful it is to be present." Her gaze locked with his, a flutter of anticipation in her chest. "So, are you present now?" A tender smile formed. "More present than I've been in years." He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a soft, almost tentative kiss on her knuckles. It sent a thrill coursing through her, a promise of something deeper, something they'd both been dancing around. In that moment, in the hush of her modest apartment, surrounded by mismatched furniture and second-hand decor, she felt more cherished than she ever had at any gala or fancy venue. Here, authenticity reigned. Here, they could be two souls quietly discovering that wealth isn't measured by bank accounts but by moments of connection, by hearts that finally find a safe place to rest. They remained there for a while, hands entwined, letting the evening air carry them into a place where hope felt tangible, where tomorrow's uncertainties felt less daunting because they were faced together, Alexander and Helena forging a bond across worlds neither had fully imagined before. 3 days drifted by, filled with a warm pattern of shared errands and spontaneous visits between Helena and Alexander. The gentle undertow of their relationship drew them closer while life's routine demands kept them grounded. They established a rhythm. Mornings often found Alexander visiting the youth center or finalizing business calls. Afternoons were spent with Helena discussing upcoming events or dropping by local community spots, and evenings ended with unhurried dinners, sometimes just the two of them, other times with Helena's aunt or Miss Raquel joining in. Yet underneath this emerging harmony, a new tension brewed. It began subtly. Alexander's phone, ever buzzing, rang with more frequency, and he'd occasionally step aside to answer in hushed, terse tones. Helena sensed a prickly undercurrent each time he returned to her, wearing a carefully controlled expression. When she asked if everything was all right, he'd wave it off, saying just corporate details or board matters that needed smoothing out. But by the morning of the next major philanthropic planning session, where Helena and Meredith would finalize the concept for the children's hospital benefit, Alexander's mood was noticeably strained. He arrived at East River Event Coordination's office wearing the same casual, thoughtful expression, but beneath that calm surface lay a flicker of urgency. They convened in a small conference room with Meredith and a few staff members. Over the next hour, Helena presented her theme concept, a whimsical carnival-inspired decor with interactive elements like a pastel-colored photo booth, balloon sculptures, and a corner for a small petting zoo. Kids loved animals if the hospital permitted it. She also included more elegant touches, plenty of soft lighting, sophisticated florals, and lounge areas for VIP donors. Meredith nodded approvingly at each slide, occasionally glancing at Alexander for feedback. He offered compliments. "That's clever. This color palette is perfect." But his voice carried a distant edge, as though half his thoughts were elsewhere. Helena caught him checking his phone under the table once, brow furrowing. The moment the meeting ended, Meredith excused herself to handle a call, and the staff dispersed to lunch. Helena and Alexander lingered in the empty conference room. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently, touching his forearm. He set his phone down, exhaling. "There's some friction at Castell Innovations, my main company. A few board members think I'm distracted by philanthropic ventures. They're concerned about upcoming acquisitions, claiming I'm not as hands-on as usual." Helena studied him, realizing that for a man who prided himself on balancing everything, this must sting. "But your philanthropy has always been part of your brand. Why would they take issue now?" Alexander glanced away. "Because I've been directing more funds and time to charitable expansions. My CFO, Carla, supports me, but a faction of the board is pushing back. They see it as diverting resources from core growth. It doesn't help that I've been physically absent from some high-level negotiations because I'm here instead, volunteering and exploring local communities." Helena bit her lip. "Is there a risk they'll block your decisions?" He hesitated. "They can't override me easily. I'm the majority shareholder. But they can complicate deals, stall expansions, or pressure me politically. I fear they'll spin it as if I've lost focus, and that could destabilize confidence in the company's direction." A protective surge rose in Helena. "You're the founder. Can't you make them see the bigger picture? That philanthropy isn't separate from your vision, but part of it?" He mustered a faint smile. "I'm trying. There's an important board meeting tomorrow, one I can't miss. They'll expect me to reaffirm my commitment to aggressive growth, to show them I haven't gone soft." Her heart twinged at the phrase. "Gone soft?" Alexander shrugged, frustration flickering. "Their words, not mine. To some of them, a CEO's job is purely profit, and philanthropic work is a side note. They're threatened by the time I'm spending away from the typical deal chasing." Helena's hand drifted to his, fingers lacing quietly. "I'm sorry. I don't want to be part of any wedge between you and your board. Maybe I should step back, let you focus on the business demands." He frowned, shaking his head. "No, this isn't about you. It's about me choosing a balanced path. I don't regret a moment I've spent with you or these communities. In fact, it feels like the most meaningful thing I've done in ages." Her gaze softened. "Then stand firm. They might grumble, but you have the authority. If they see you're serious, and that philanthropy doesn't harm profits, maybe they'll adapt." He squeezed her hand, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you. Your conviction helps." They parted ways briefly, Helena to finalize the carnival decor outline, Alexander to address urgent calls about the looming board showdown. She watched him stride down the hallway, shoulders squared, outwardly calm. Yet she caught the tension in his jaw that spoke of an internal battle. She felt a pang, wishing she could lighten the burden. The next morning, Helena woke early, texting a short good luck message. "You've got this. Remember your vision is valid. Proud of you no matter what." H. He replied with a simple, "Thank you. Means more than you know." As she busied herself with event tasks, Helena kept half an eye on her phone, wondering how the meeting was progressing. She pictured a polished boardroom somewhere high in Castell Innovations Tower, powerful executives locked in debate, all eyes on Alexander. She hoped they had the sense to see that philanthropic commitment was an asset, not a detriment. By late afternoon, Helena was at the youth center helping Miss Raquel reorganize the art supply closet. Kids flowed in and out, rummaging for crayons or poster paper. She tried to focus on labeling boxes for easy reference, scissors, markers, glue sticks, yet her thoughts kept drifting to Alexander's predicament. Finally, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. Alexander, and felt a leap of relief. She stepped into a quieter corner, pressing the phone to her ear. "Hey." His exhale crackled over the line. "It was tense," he said. "They challenged me on everything. My time spent outside expansions, the money diverted to philanthropic projects, the schedule of acquisitions. But in the end I held firm." Helena's pulse steadied. "So, what's the outcome?" A hint of triumph threaded his voice. "They backed down, mostly. Or at least, they recognized it's my decision. I proposed a new framework showing how philanthropic efforts can build brand loyalty and open new markets indirectly. A few remained skeptical, but I negotiated an agreement. I'll keep pushing expansions, but on my own timeline, without sacrificing the foundation's growth." She smiled widely, relief cascading through her. "That's great. You managed to speak their language while standing your ground." He let out a tired chuckle. "It drained me, though. Thank you for your faith. I kept remembering your words. I have the authority, and philanthropy is an integral part of who I am." Her heart swelled. "I'm proud of you, truly." He paused. "I'd like to see you tonight, if you're free. Feels like I could use a quiet evening in good company." She glanced around the supply closet. "Yes, absolutely. I'm here for a while, but maybe we can do dinner again, or I could cook at my place, unless you want me to come to your penthouse this time." Alexander hesitated. "My place? Sure, if you'd be comfortable. It's different from your neighborhood, sterile even. But I'd like you to see it. I'll text you the address." Helena felt a prickle of anticipation. "Okay, I'll bring dessert or something. I might be a bit late if it's across town." He agreed, sounding genuinely appreciative. "Take your time. I'll make sure dinner is ready, somehow." They said warm goodbyes, and Helena ended the call, cheeks tinged with excitement. She emerged from the supply closet to find Miss Raquel giving her a knowing look. "Alexander, right?" she teased. "Yes," Helena admitted with a soft grin. "He wants me to come to his penthouse tonight. He had a big showdown with his board. It went all right, but he sounds drained." Miss Raquel smiled approvingly. "Go on, dear. We can handle the rest here. The kids will survive without you for one evening." Helena didn't argue. She placed a final label on a marker box, waved goodbye to the staff, and hurried home. After freshening up, she selected a simple yet elegant outfit, a knee-length black skirt with a pastel blouse and a light jacket. She bought a small box of pastries from her favorite bakery, figuring it would be a nice surprise. Then she caught a bus that trundled her into the city's upscale district. Twilight had just fallen when she arrived at the towering glass building that housed Alexander's penthouse. The doorman recognized her name from a guest list and ushered her to a private elevator, which soared skyward at a near-silent speed. Helena's nerves jangled lightly. She'd visited high-end hotels and event spaces before, but stepping into Alexander's personal realm felt distinctly more intimate. The elevator doors slid open onto a hallway with polished marble floors. At the end stood a single door. Before she could knock, it opened. Alexander on the other side, wearing a crisp shirt with sleeves rolled up, tie absent, a soft warmth in his eyes. "You made it," he said, ushering her in. "Wow," she breathed, stepping onto glossy hardwood floors that reflected dimmed city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The open living area stretched wide, tastefully furnished in neutral tones and sleek lines. One entire wall was glass, revealing a panoramic view of the metropolis below, glittering lights like a celestial tapestry. "It's beautiful," she managed, setting the pastry box on a black granite countertop. "But it feels empty." Alexander nodded, half apologetic. "Yes, I never spent much time here, so I kept it minimal. I bought this place for convenience, close to the office, big enough for hosting corporate guests, but I rarely host." Helena moved closer to the window, marveling at the cityscape. She could see the faint outlines of roads snaking through neon clusters, a few landmark skyscrapers glimmering. "Amazing view. Feels like a different world from my apartment." He stepped beside her, the reflection of city lights dancing on his shirt. "Sometimes I stand here thinking I should feel accomplished, but it's isolating, like I'm watching the city from above, not part of it." She turned to him, laying a hand on his arm. "You've become part of it lately, walking the streets, meeting people. That's what matters." He smiled, leaning to brush a soft kiss to her temple, a gesture of gratitude. Then, stepping back, he gestured toward the open-concept kitchen. "I tried cooking. Don't laugh if it turns out terrible. I had some meal kit delivered." Helena chuckled, following him. "I'm sure it's fine. Need help?" He shook his head. "Got it mostly done. Just have to plate it. Wine?" She nodded, and soon they settled in his sleek dining area, the city lights twinkling behind them like a private galaxy. The meal, some herb-crusted chicken with roasted vegetables, surprised her by being quite tasty. She complimented him, and he admitted with a grin that the recipe was step-by-step, nearly foolproof. Over dinner, they revisited the day's events, his board meeting triumph, her continued carnival-themed planning. But as the conversation flowed, Helena sensed a deeper shift in Alexander's manner. He looked at her with an intimacy that stirred something deep within her. Gone was the guarded CEO. In his place was a man allowing himself to be vulnerable. When they finished, Helena retrieved the pastry box. They shared bites of sweet eclairs and cream puffs, laughing as powdered sugar dusted their fingers. At one point, she swiped a crumb from his chin, and he caught her wrist, his eyes speaking volumes. The air crackled with a gentle tension, the magnetism that had been building for weeks. Quietly, he led her to a plush sofa near the windows. A low lamp cast a warm glow. She kicked off her shoes, tucking her legs under her. He loosened his collar, leaning back with a soft sigh. They sat close, arms brushing, until he finally reached to tuck her hair behind her ear. She exhaled slowly, meeting his gaze. "Helena," he murmured, voice low. "I've been telling my board I can balance everything, but you're the one helping me see what balance really looks like. Not just more success, but more heart. He faltered, emotion flickering over his expression. She placed her hand over his, guiding it to rest against her cheek. "Alexander, you don't have to say everything perfectly. I feel it too." He swallowed, a note of relief in his eyes. "I've never let anyone into my life like this. It's scary, but also more right than anything else." Tears pricked at her eyelids unexpectedly. She understood that fear because she felt it too, this precarious step into uncharted territory bridging vastly different worlds, yet the sincerity in his voice anchored her. "I'm here," she whispered, leaning close, "and I'm not going anywhere." His free hand slipped around her waist, drawing her near until their foreheads nearly touched. "Thank you," he breathed. Then softly, almost hesitantly, he pressed his lips to hers. A quiet, electric rush coursed through Helena as she kissed him back, her hand sliding up to his shoulder. It was a tender union of all their shared moments, collisions at galas, heartfelt discussions by ponds, grocery runs in crowded markets, dinner at her modest apartment. Each memory fused into the now, a promise sealed in warmth. They broke apart gently, lingering in the hush. Outside the window, the city's neon glow shimmered, a silent witness to their unfolding story. Helena rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady against her. Neither spoke, for words felt unnecessary. In that embrace, they found the quiet affirmation they'd both been longing for. They belonged together, even if the path ahead was uncertain. Eventually they eased back, eyes locked in shared wonder. He brushed a thumb over her cheek and sighed happily. "I guess I'll have to cook more often," he quipped, and she laughed softly, the sound echoing in the penthouse's stillness. A comfortable silence followed, letting them savor the moment. Outside, the city's pulse carried on, cars gliding across midnight streets, lights winking in towering buildings. But within this lofty apartment, high above the bustle, Helena and Alexander discovered a rare, precious calm, the kind that blossoms when two hearts from two very different worlds find their way to each other at last. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.